IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We are live here on a Monday, which of course means it's a little Notre Dame mailbag starting the week off, right? Especially in a week where there's not going to be Notre Dame football. Of course, Notre Dame coming off of a big 56-23 victory over Stanford, which was not as close as a 56-23 margin would necessarily say on paper. But Notre Dame sitting at 9-3, awaiting obviously the bowl game. I know there's a couple different options that could potentially be on the table for the bowl game, which I'm sure someone will ask at some point in this podcast. But Brian Driscoll,
there's a really good front page article, Ryan, written by yours truly, Brian Driscoll, explaining all the bowl options.
I did read that this morning. So great options to read. You should go there at irishbreakdown.com. You can also go to boards@irishbreakdown.com, guys. We are, feels like off-season talk already. We're in the constant conversation of offensive coordinator and, what's the philosophy change and who's coming here, who's going there, who's declaring early, who's every talk that you usually get from an off-season. We're starting it today, folks. And the great thing about this podcast, as you know, you get to control the conversation, right? You get to ask the questions. We feed off of you all because we love the IB Nation community, obviously, and everyone that's in the chat each and every day. It's great because, I've been in some chats before where it's just like, I've never seen that guy's name before. That's a newbie. For the most part, we have like everyone just coming back. We know all these names in the chat for the most part. So if you're first time with us, though, make sure when you throw a question in the chat that you want us to answer, make sure to put a mailbag or an MB in front of that question so that we can easily distinguish what is a mailbag question compared to you just having a conversation with someone in the chat. So, Brian, ready to go, man. I'm always ready to go with mailbags. So,
yeah, mailbags are, look, in season, out of season, man, they're always a lot of fun. Love mailbags. And so I want to start off, Ryan, with there was a silly rumor going around. And look, guys, there's always going to be a lot of really ridiculous, stupid rumors going around. And if you think that a guy from Arkansas is going to have scoop on Notre Dame's offensive coordinator being replaced before me, Tim Priester, Pete Sampson, John Bryce, whose like second job is literally working at Football Scoop. You know what I mean? Like, come on. But we'll address it. Ryan, Coleman Smith asks, any facts to the UNLV OC news posted by the Tribune?
Well, Brian,
Tribune, in fairness, the Tribune wasn't stating that. The Tribune simply said, this guy, reporter, is saying that. So I just want to, in fairness to the Tribune, I think it's ill-advised to post something like that, but they at least wrote it. This is what someone is saying, so.
Right. Yeah. And I'll let you get into obviously the ridiculousness of this. I would say this, Brian, is that I saw someone put it on the message board this morning and I didn't even want to respond to it, man. I literally at one point, I think just put like, I have a headache, guys. Like, look, Brandon Marion's a really good wide receiver coach, right? Or I would say a good wide receiver coach. Maybe really good's a little bit too much.
No, I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say he's really good. Good track record, but yes, I understand. Ryan, you're always reserved. I'm
always reserved, man. He's a good position coach. Offensive coordinator perspective, it's a limited sample size. We're talking about a guy though that was at Texas in 2022, and don't want to say pushed out, but like it was a kind of a agreement to part ways of sorts, right? And then he goes out to UNLV under Barry Odom, who I respect tremendously as a defensive mind, Barry Odom, and he has a really good year this year. They have like a 35 point per game average this year. I think that Brendan Marion did a really good job as the OC at UNLV. But guys, if we're going to, and again, this isn't a shot at Irish Tribune, this is a shot at just this person making this report, right? Originally, if you're going to make up clickbait, at least make it someone that's a little bit more reasonable. Like, that's actually kind of interesting. Maybe there's some smoke there. Maybe there's some heat there, whatever. I read it and I'm just like, that's just not true. Also, I read a report separately Clark Lee was fired by some doofus who reported it that had like 800 followers. I'm like, that's also
And I
not true. And
believe that's been debunked as well. Look, now
yes,
here's the thing. I'm not saying now Marcus Freeman was asked about this today, and his response was, I don't know who that is. Somebody said, reports about you talking to, I think John Bryce asked it. Reports about, you guys reaching out to Brendan Marion. And his response was, I don't know who that is. And then he was reminded it's the UNLV OC. And he's like, oh, sure. He goes, no, he hasn't been contacted by me or basically like anybody in my office. Now, could somebody in an administration standpoint reached out for some ridiculous reason? Like if I found out that Ron Paulus made that call, would I be shocked at all? No, I have no evidence of that, but I could see him doing something stupid like that. However, would you tell if you were to tell me that they reached out to him with the thought of possibly should there be a change at the receiver's position? Would you be interested in coming in and being a receivers coach, maybe throw a title of pass game coordinator in there? I'd be okay with that, Ryan, because he'd kind of basically serve the same role that, that we all wish they would have, hired Jamarcus Shepard to do a couple years ago. You think about where Notre Dame would be right now if Jamarcus Shepard was the receivers coach and him and Jared Parker were kind of, co-coordinating the offense. Feel probably pretty good about that, right? And maybe Brendan Marion can do that. But guys, we're gonna, just like there was a rumor about during the bye week about how Jared Parker was going to be reassigned, when in reality, my understanding is he was going to be reassigned or someone else is going to have more responsibilities. Where my understanding is the opposite is actually what happened. So it's like we could do this all day, but I'm telling you guys, just stop getting rumors from Twitter.
it's called X now, man. It's called X.
I refuse, especially now that people get paid for engagement, because now literally there's incentive to put something crazy out there that's going to get engagement from people.
You can also buy a verification now. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. I remember when I first got verified on Twitter, I'm like, that's pretty cool. That means I earned that, right? Like, that's pretty neat. And then they took my verification tag because now all you can do is just buy a verification tag on Twitter for $8 a month. And I'm just like, well, that doesn't matter anymore for anyone now, does it?
Right. But the point is you can get verified and just claim you do something, and then you put out some crazy rumor that gets 1 million responses and reposts, and all of a sudden, boom, you're getting paid for that.
Yeah.
And look, I have no problem with it from a business standpoint of what Elon Musk is doing. It is what it is. I understand it. He's got to make a company that wasn't profitable, whatever. You got to do what you got to do, right? But there's just more and more and more silliness. And just let's just say, guys, it's okay asking about it. It is. Just don't run with it as if it's true. That would be my only request. Just, shoot me a DM, shoot me an email. I've had people say, hey, look, I heard this rumor. And if I haven't heard it, I will chase it down. I just won't dismiss it out of hand. I'll ask people. And I did that with the Brendan Marion stuff. Like I was very confident that was false based on a conversation that I had with a very good source yesterday about what's going to happen at the OC position. And so I kind of had a feeling it was BS, but I still reached out to folks at Notre Dame, and they kind of got a chuckle at it and immediately denied it and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't want to take shots at Brendan Marion, but like if your issue is you don't like the job Jared Parker did this year because he lacks experience, I don't understand what bringing in Brendan Marion would fix in that regard. He's been an offensive coordinator for 1 year at UNLV. And then look, to put into context the job that he did at UNLV, I mean, UNLV just fired their coach the year before. Like, they averaged 26 points a game. I mean, they had about a 9-point jump this year in scoring this season. They had a per game average of for yards about a 70-point jump. They went from 5.5 yards per play in 2022 to 6.2 this year. That none of the numbers are going to blow you away. 35 points and 6.2 yards per play is not going to blow you away, but the context of what they were before is an improvement. But I just want to remind you that Notre Dame's offense this year improved by even more points per game and had a much greater yards per play jump than what they had at UNLV in year one to year two.
Yeah.
So, let's see how this thing plays out. Do I think there could be staff changes? Yeah, I do. But if anybody leaves, it's most likely because they're getting a promotion, or as far as the coordinators, Al Golden, something like that. But Marcus Freeman understands they got to get better, but as I've said a million times, getting better doesn't always mean just firing everybody that didn't do the job that they needed to do. Sometimes it is that. Sometimes it is that, right? Sometimes you need to make a personnel change. It is.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like sitting down and saying, "Hey, listen, you can be better. You need to be better. Let's figure out how you got better." And that everything that Marcus Freeman talked about today that's the conversations they're having with Jared Parker. Like, look, we did a lot of good things this year, but he mentioned without being asked, we got to figure out why we didn't play better against the best defenses that we faced. He flat out said it before even being asked. Now he was prompted about the question later, and
Sure.
but he said it without asking. Like, and so my point is, Marcus Freeman knows, Jared Parker knows they got to get better in those instances, and that's a good thing. We didn't hear like, I was so happy to hear what Coach said today when talking about the offense, because we didn't hear we just got to coach a little better and play a little harder next year. Just execute a little bit better. We didn't hear any of that. It's like, look, guys, we got to figure out what the reason for this was and fix it. And that's what we're going to do. And that's a good thing.
Yep. So Brendan Marion is not going to be the next offensive coordinator at Notre Dame this year. Clark Lee is not fired. Jimbo Fisher is not going to take over Vanderbilt. All the rumors that I'm watching on
that's
Twitter
the thing is, like, if the tweet would have just said Clark Lee replaced it or fired at Vanderbilt, I would have had a problem with Vanderbilt doing that. It would have surprised me. But they went 2-10 and lost their last 10 games, right? I mean, they had and I believe every single one of them was by double digits. No, except for one. They lost to UNLV by 3. Ooh. But every other game was by double digits. It was a bad year for Clark Lee. It really was. But firing him after 2 years, I just wouldn't see. But then when you saw the thing about, like, Jimbo Fisher's the replacement, like, come on, guys. Like, seriously?
Jimbo's going to Vanderbilt. Come on, guys.
And I believe if Jimbo takes a job, he loses a chunk of his buyout. I believe most are like that. I mean, most jobs are like that, where you lose some of your buy. Not all. I mean, Charlie Weissel got paid by Notre Dame, even though he took the Kansas job. But that would surprise me very, very much.
Yep. Jimbo. Tyler Evans kicking off the super chats today. Thank you so much, Tyler. What do you think of the new hires at Texas A&M and Mississippi State?
Well, obviously, Texas A&M hired Mike Elko. I think that's a grand slam home run hire. I love Mike Elko as a coach. I love Mike Elko as a human being. Texas A&M is a program that needs discipline, and Mike Elko, I believe, can bring that. I mean, his side of the ball was the strength of Texas A&M when he was there. I mean, his last year, Ryan, didn't they like jump into like the top 15 nationally defensively in his last year there at Texas A&M?
I think that was the year.
No, I'm sorry, they were number 3. Yeah. They were number 3 in scoring defense his last year. Well, if you look at where Texas A&M was the year before he got there, and look at where they were in scoring defense, they were 87th. They gave up 30 points a game in 17. He comes in and they jump up to 47th. They knock off 5 points. 2019, they jumped up more to 36 at 22 points. The COVID year, obviously the defense was one of the driving forces behind their success. They ranked 28th, and then in 21 they ranked 3rd. So he did a really, really good job building up that defense and getting them rocking and rolling. So we saw what he did in Notre Dame. He's a strong recruiter. He knows the strengths of Texas A&M, and he knows the weaknesses at Texas A&M and things that need to be fixed. So, and Mike Elko is going to have a very unique NIL approach, I believe. My opinion. I think he doesn't love the idea of just going out there and buying a roster, but he also understands that NIL needs to be a part of what you do. So I think you're going to see him be a little bit proper in how you embrace NIL. Like, guys, we're just not going to start throwing money at the kids, and the only reason they're coming is because they're getting money. If there's a kid we want and he likes us and we've got to make him an offer, then we'll make him an offer. But if some kid wants to go somewhere else, we're not just going to go buy him, because we're just not going to win that way. That kid's going to come here, and if he's not the starter, the guy, he's going to leave. And I think Mike Elko also understands that a lot of those kids that only want the money are kids that are going to come here, and if they have success, jump into the portal for another payday. That's just how it's going to work with those kids who are only looking for money. Mike Elko, I think, needs to find the kids like the Jeremiah Loves, the Braylon Jameses, the Jaden Greathouses, who, yes, I would like to get NIL money, but my decision is going to be based on, I want to play for you. Now, what can you do for me? That was the conversation Braylon James had, right? Like, I'm going to Notre Dame. Now, guys, here's the things I'm passionate about. Are there ways that we can tap into that for money? Jeremiah Love did that with his comic book strip. Like, They are finding ways to monetize him and the things he does, but it's a byproduct of him coming to Notre Dame. It's not the reason he came to Notre Dame. And I think that's where Mike Elko is going to spend a lot of his time. Is like the good coaches understand, folks. We need to be using NIL to keep our current roster, not to buy a roster. That's not going to work. USC does that. How's that worked out for USC? A&M did that a couple years ago. Went out and bought a bunch of high school kids, and how'd that number one class turn out? Right, half of it's not there anymore. Right, and so I think it was a great hire. Ryan. Yeah. I'll address Jeff Lebby next, but I wanted to get your thought. I want to let you talk about Mike Elko first.
I think it's pretty much a best case scenario for Texas A&M. I mean, I was actually curious to see where they went after like the Mark Stoops stuff that came out a couple days ago, and that whole situation was kind of funky, but they end up getting a guy that is a very good up and coming head coach, a guy that can definitely coach just point blank period, right? He's a really good coach. He's a developer. He can recruit. And he's been a part of the Texas A&M program, so he knows the in and outs. He knows from an athletic department perspective what's really good, what needs to improve, what you can do and what you can't do, and what he perceives to be the best perspective on growth at Texas A&M. So I think that he is going to do a really good job at Texas A&M. I think the interesting thing that I'm going to be looking forward to is that Texas A&M is a lot more talented than what their on-field record was this year. There's a lot of talent in that room, a whole lot on that team. When you have a coaching change, is there going to be a big exodus on a roster, right, as far as players hitting the transfer portal and trying to find other avenues? Or is Mike Elko someone that comes in and is able to retain a decent amount of the talent because, one, some guys know him, and then two, are you excited about that hire? So I'm interested to see just kind of first year perspective, short-term perspective, how much impact Mike Elko can have as far as keeping some of that talent in the building and getting them to buy in. But long-term, I think it's a great hire. He's a different, but similar to what I said about like Jeff Traylor and a couple of those guys that were up for the conversation is they're developers, right? Like they are guys, and I feel similar to Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. Like I think that Mike Elko is going to build this for the long term at Texas A&M. Texas A&M, whenever he leaves down the line, whenever, I think that Texas A&M will be in a much better situation than where they were when he took it over, right? Like I truly believe that. So I think he's going to develop it. I think he's going to recruit well. Long term, I think it's going to be a home run. I'm just curious to see what it looks like short term. Is he able to convince those guys that like, hey, come play with me, stick this out, buy in, and we'll be really successful? Because there's a lot of talent there, man. If they're able to get him to buy in, there is a lot of talent there.
And if you're Texas A&M, I think smart part of this job. First of all, I'm curious. Like, I would love to hear the backstory. Like, did they reach out to Elko and he said no, and then they turned to Stoops, and then when they came back to him after the Stoops fiasco, he had all the leverage so he could get a huge deal. I have no idea. Did they go to Stoops first? Like, because if they went to Stoops first over Mike Elko, I got to question that. I'm sorry, I just do. And I'm someone who likes Mark Stoops as a coach, and I didn't hate that hire. I needed to think about it more, but Mike Elko seems like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you go there in the first place? However, the good thing about it is why it's smart to bring him in, however it happened, is a lot of kids on that team veterans were recruited by Mike Elko. And they're going to be able to tell the younger players while Mike Elko's getting settled, hey, guys, this is a good dude. You're going to like him. Just stick it out. You got 30 days before you got to get in the portal. Just stick it out. See what coach is all about, and you're going to really like it because he's going to have a reputation in the building. And then keeping the guy that took over as the interim coach, he D-line coach? Was he the D-line coach for them?
Yes. Yep.
That's a smart move because he worked with Mike Elko, and he was the guy that a lot of the players were kind of politicking to keep as the head coach. So you're going to be able to keep him, and not just keep him because you got to be a piece of players, but the players are going to know. We know Coach Elko likes him. Coach Elko brought him in, and Coach Elko worked with him. So we know they're not just appeasing him. He respects him, and he's going to give him a key role in the defense. Like I could see something like maybe, him and Tyler Santucci being like co-coordinators or something like that, or he could be like the assistant head coach or something like that. Those are all things that I think we could see.
Yeah. Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State, Brian, just to start this conversation off. It's a wait and see for me. I don't know. I don't know if Jeff Lebby, because one, he's 39, right? So he's a little bit younger, but not like super young. I don't know him as a person and from a structural perspective of like, what is his ideology for building a program. I have no idea. The one thing I do know is that the guy's been around some really good offensive minds, and Oklahoma year 1 to Oklahoma year 2 was a much better improvement of offensive football. So I think Mississippi State will be a much better offense moving forward with Jeff Lebby. And I think some of the principles that Mike Leach had instilled in that program are going to be similar to Lebby, because he's a different style of air raid, but he's still an air raid coach at the end of the day, right? So I think he's going to get the offense turned around in Mississippi State. Will he be able to be a great head coach at Mississippi State? I have no idea. I don't know anything about him from a program building perspective. This is a boomer bust hire, in my opinion. Either it's going to go really well and you'll be like, oh, wow, Jeff Lebby's actually a pretty good coach, or it's going to be like, that guy's an offense coordinator that's not ready to be a head coach yet. Like, he's just not ready. So I have no idea what to 100% make of it. I do think that he's a really good offensive mind for what that's worth, but can he build a program? No idea. And I know he's a good recruiter too, so that'll help. But other than that, I have no idea how he's going to do building a program.
Ryan, I look, you can't know until he's never done it. The only thing I would say is when I look at Jeff Lebby, number one, he has experience being in that area, in that region, right? Having, coached at Ole Miss for a couple of years, and he, coached at UCF for several years. So like, he's recruited the Southeast. He's not like a guy coming from the West Coast in Oklahoma. I mean, he's coached at Baylor, and he's coached in the Southeast before. I think that helps. And he's a guy that is familiar with the SEC, having coached in the league for a couple of years. That helps, right? He's been at a big time program. That helps. And I would say, looking at his offenses the last couple of years at Oklahoma, and looking especially at the growth from year 1 to year 2, I think he's a guy that understands certain things that a coach needs to do. Now, will he apply those things? I don't know. But at a place like Mississippi State, like if Notre Dame would have made that hire, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it's one thing to promote a coordinator who you've worked with. You've seen him in action like Marcus Freeman. Right. But at a place like Mississippi State, I think this is the kind of risk you need to take, to be honest with you, is a guy like him. It's an innovative offensive mind. I understand why they went with Zach Arnett. You wanted some stability after the tragic passing of Coach Leach. He did a nice job at the and defensive coordinator, but it was clearly just he wasn't ready to be a head coach at that point in time. I think Mississippi State's a place that has to build and win the way that they have. Where it's, look, guys, go get an innovative offensive mind and a guy that can recruit. And Dan Mullen had a reputation as a good recruiter early in his career. He just stopped doing it once he became big time. He just stopped wanting to do it. So a lot of those peripheral things, Ryan, I think make a lot of sense. It's a I won't say boom or bust, but it's like how we talk recruiting. It's a low floor, somewhat highish ceiling, higher, like 3.5-star guy with 4.5-star upside kind of thing, right? And that's the kind of risk you have to take at Mississippi State, to be honest with you.
Sure.
Is get the young guy, let him work through some kinks. You had a rough year, and take that chance. Take your shot. And so I like the hire, Ryan, based on that. Will he work or not? I don't know, for the same reasons that you said you don't know. I just don't know enough about Coach Lebby of how he's going to implement all the structural things as a head coach, and know if he's going to succeed or not. I had a chance to evaluate that with Marcus Freeman because I covered his football team for a year. And I got to learn about the things he did as a defensive coordinator that made me comfortable saying, I think Marcus Freeman needs to be the next head coach. I just didn't get those chances with Jeff Lebby. But from what I can do as an outsider, I think the hire makes a lot of sense. Because if you were to go get like a Jamie Chadwell, I just kind of look at Jamie Chadwell as like, okay, he's going to use you to then get that next job if he wins. Like, he just strikes me as that kind of guy. You know what I mean? And I'm not in love with Jamie Chadwell as a coach, to be honest with you. Maybe he turned the job down. I don't know. But I would much rather go with this than that direction for me if I was Mississippi State.
I'm going to be interested to see who the defensive coordinator is that Jeff Lebby chooses. Because, I mean, offensive side of football, feel good about it, right? Mississippi State, though, quietly over the last 10 years or so, has gotten some really good defensive players to come there as well, though, right? Like, they've gotten the Chris Joneses of the world, the Jeffrey Simmons, the Willie Gays. Like, they've had some really good
Montez
defensive players.
Sweat.
Errol Thompson. Like, they've had some good defensive players.
Didn't Darius Slay come from Mississippi State?
He did. Yep.
Darius and then that corner that I know you liked a lot last year, right? Was a kid that you loved last year in the draft. Yeah, I know you liked him a lot. Yeah.
They also had the corner. I forget the kid's name for the kid got drafted in like the second or third round the year before. Martin Emerson was a good player
Mhm.
too. Got drafted in the third round. He's actually a pretty good player for Cleveland
They had
Browns
a
already too.
really good safety a couple years ago. They got hurt really early in the season and just I think that really killed his draft. I can't remember the kid's name, but he was considered a really top player, and he got hurt like game 2 or something like that a couple years ago. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's surprising. It's
yeah,
surprising. They've had some really good, like some elite defensive players. That's why I say you got to have a guy that can recruit, and I think
yeah.
Jeff Lebby can recruit. He'll do a good
Yep.
job
So if you
recruiting.
get a good
And
defensive coach in there and you can recruit and get your offense rolling,
yeah,
then Mississippi State could quietly be a good
and
program in the SEC.
And here's the key, Ryan. He's coached in Texas, he's coached in Louisiana, he's coached in Mississippi, and he's coached in Florida. Those are to me the 4 most important states for the coach at Mississippi State to be able to hit. Go find those 3-star because like you're going to look for the same kids at Mississippi State that you looked for when you were at Baylor and UCF. Those
Sure.
you weren't at UCF out recruiting Florida State for kids. You were trying to find that 3-star diamond in the rough kid that was really, really fast, but I needed to teach how to run routes, right? That's what you would go out and find. And
Yep.
I think finding a guy that has experience recruiting that type of player also makes a lot of sense. It really does.
Right. Next question's from MT41. Mike Elko at A&M scares me. His Duke teams have been disciplined and physical, and he's going to have access to a lot more talent at Texas A&M.
I mean, number one, you're at Notre Dame, right? You're a Notre Dame fan, and no one should scare you. But do I think that A&M has a shot to get a lot better under Mike Elko? Absolutely. Do I think Elko has a chance to build A&M into a team that actually lives up to its constant hype? I do. I do. And just for the SEC overall, this is a great hire for the SEC. It is. I mean, just the league to me got better today in the last couple days with Jeff Lebby replacing Zach Arnett, but especially with Mike Elko replacing Jimbo Fisher. Because, like, let's not forget this is why Texas A&M. I thought they were going to go higher name. I wonder if they got turned down by some guys. But here's the thing: you went out and got Jimbo because he was a name, because he had a national championship. Jimbo Fisher, national champion at Florida State in 2013, which, I have my opinions on that. But let's not forget Florida State was ready to be done with Jimbo Fisher when they got rid of him. I mean, they were ready to be done with Jimbo Fisher before he left. Before he left for Texas A&M. So you didn't hire a guy that was at his peak. To me, Mike Elko is a hot candidate. I mean, you look at his record and you say 7-5, and it's not overly impressive. But again, the guy won 16 games in 2 years. In the previous 4 years, they won 10 as a program. And when you look at kind of how they performed after losing Riley Leonard, after he got injured, you struggled against Florida State and Louisville with him being banged up, and then he goes out and you go 2-2 down the stretch. Like, he salvaged that a little bit. That could have been a much worse situation. And he wasn't the only guy that got injured. I think Mike Elko is a heck of a coach, and I think the SEC just got better today from a coaching standpoint. I think there's a much greater chance, and that's good for Notre Dame. Like, here's the other thing, Ryan. I think it's good for Notre Dame that a guy like Mike Elko is at Texas A&M, because now there's much greater chances of them kind of beating each other up in regular season with those type of hires. Mike Elko is going to take a lot more players from Alabama and LSU than he's going to take from Notre Dame. I mean, just Notre Dame doesn't go against Texas A&M that much, right?
Sure.
And you were already losing those guys to Texas A&M anyway. And so I think it's a good hire for them. I think it's a good hire for Notre Dame. Now, I know Notre Dame plays Texas A&M the next couple of years. I get that. But if you're doing the job you should do, Marcus Freeman in year 3 should not be losing to, Mike Elko in year 1. Depending on what happens this offseason. But if you do, then you beat him in year 4. I mean, that's just when you get him at home. So it shouldn't scare you. Notre Dame, you should embrace that if you're Notre Dame. Embrace playing the best. And that's the only way you can truly know. Like, if you play Texas A&M and they hire Mark Stoops or, some other that promoted the guy from within, and you beat him next year, like, okay, great, you get a win. But did you really learn anything about yourself as a program? Did you really get better? Did you really have a way to gauge yourself? You beat Mike Elko with the players he's going to have at Texas A&M the next couple of years. Now, all of a sudden, I feel pretty good about where Notre Dame is as a program. Much better about where they are as a program. It's a good gauge. I'd much rather play them at their best than, I hope so-and-so doesn't play. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
The one thing I know about that hire is, because I think it's going to be successful as well, but the one thing I know is that there's been some moments over the last couple of years where I'm like, I don't know if the Texas A&M team really wanted to be on that field that day. I don't think that's ever going to be a case under Mike Elko. He's going to get buy-in, and even if that means some kids leaving because they don't buy in, so be it. But I think
He
that the
won't
team that
have
he
a
puts on
problem with that at all,
Saturdays,
Ryan.
yeah, yeah,
You're right. He will not have a problem with that at all. Like, hey, you don't want to do it the way I want to do it? Fine. Go
yeah,
somewhere else and lose because we're going to win here. He absolutely has that personality. And the funny thing is when you meet him, he's very disarming in that regard. Like he could say something to you that's like not very friendly, but the way he says it, it's just kind of like an all shucks kind of like he definitely does not present himself like I'm an Ivy League graduate. You know
sure,
what I mean? Like Bob Diaco did. He wasn't an Ivy League graduate. Mike Elko almost kind of like has more of a I played at Iowa kind of mentality, just kind of but he's not. He's a Jersey kid that played at Penn. You know what I mean? Like he's a really intellectual guy, but he doesn't. And what I mean by he doesn't throw that in your face. I'm intellect. I mean, he almost kind of comes across as like, dude, you went to an Ivy League school, right? Just how he kind of has that all shucks mentality. So even when he's being harsh, I think it's like he can do it in a way that is almost kind of like, yeah, you take it.
yeah,
Yeah, you're right, coach. And I think that's why he was able to have success building those defenses at Texas A&M, despite playing for head coach that I think just had zero ability to instill discipline and all those other things in the program. He was able to kind of work through that and turn A&M into a really good defense, during his tenure.
yep. We had a question from Tommy Guns. Got in here about 40 minutes early, and Tommy Guns had 97 questions
He
in. So
pulled his
Tommy,
best John A1 impression. There's
he
no doubt.
did. Yes, he did. Prediction for tomorrow night's top 5 teams. I was talking about the college football playoff rankings.
I mean, I think number 1 will be Georgia. I think Michigan will be
Yep.
number 2.
Yep.
I think Washington's going to slide up to number 3. I think Florida State's going to slide up to number 4, and I think Oregon's going to slide up to number 5. And then basically what they're doing is they're positioning that battle for the winner of the Pac-12 championship to get in.
Yep.
Now, could they move Texas up potentially? Maybe. I would personally have Texas ahead of Oregon. But I just don't see how you can justify doing that now if you didn't do that a week ago. You know what I mean? Like, because Oregon's resume just got better this weekend. They blew out their rival in a top 15 team. Texas blew out Texas Tech, who's 500 team. Like, you can't, if you didn't do that last week, you can't do that now, which then leaves you in a situation where if Michigan beats Iowa and Georgia beats Alabama and whoever wins the Pac-12 title game and Florida State beats Louisville, Texas is going to be sitting on the outside looking in for the playoff, which
I think that's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Winner of the Pac-12 championship is going to make the playoff, in my opinion. And I'm interested to see what happens. Actually, I'm not even interested in seeing that. Yeah, I think the winner of the Pac-12 is going to make it. I personally think Oregon's going to beat Washington, but we shall see, obviously, in a couple weeks.
But if Oregon beats Washington, they deserve to be in.
100%.
I mean, look, they beat a top 5 team, a team that's been a top 5 team all year, and got a payback win over a team that beat them earlier in a competitive game at the other team's place. It wasn't like Georgia Auburn in 2020 or 17, Ryan, where Auburn stomped Georgia in the regular season, and then Georgia stomped Auburn in the SEC title game. If all Oregon does is win by 3, all right, you've proven yourself to be a playoff team. I mean, because to me, the thing that hurts Texas, I think Texas has a better resume than Oregon. I do. Oregon, however, would have a strong finish to the year. In the last month, they would have beaten Utah, Oregon State, and Washington. And I think the Pac-12 is one of the 2 to 3 best conferences in college football this year. And you base it based on the results, what the results were out of conference. And the winner of that, if they have a 1 loss, is going to be that team. I just kind of, it's a no-brainer if Washington wins. But and what hurts Texas is the fact that even though I think Texas, if they win out, should be one of the top 4 teams, the thing that's going to hurt Texas is your league sucks. I mean, the Big 12 was bad this year, in my opinion. It was really bad. I mean, a team that's playing for the Big 12 title this weekend got their butts kicked by South Alabama. Think about that.
Yeah.
Like, that's hurting your conference. Like, the fact that Oklahoma is not the team they're playing hurts Texas's chances of building their resume. It just does. It just does. So I think the only way you could justify jumping Texas in, Ryan, it's going to have to be like Ohio State 2014 all over again. They're going to have to absolutely murder Oklahoma State. I mean, they're going to have to destroy Oklahoma State in a way where you're like, holy crap, like that team is really good. Then you could maybe justify leaping Florida State out, dropping Florida State out because their resume is not as strong because of Louisville losing to Kentucky. And then you could justify it, well, they don't have their quarterback. And as we saw the last 2 weeks, they're not the same team without that quarterback. I think you'd have a better justification of dropping them out than the Pac-12 champ out for Texas. And I don't know that they'll do that.
Yeah. Well, I think we talked about the top three. I would envision Georgia, Michigan, and the winner of the Pac to be one of the top three. I wouldn't be shocked if Florida State lost to Louisville in the ACC championship game where you're just like, well, that conversation doesn't really matter anymore, right? Because it's like now they drop out and Texas jumps up to 4. I mean,
they looked really bad this weekend against Florida, Ryan, without Jordan Travis.
They did.
They tried to give that game to Florida. Florida just like, no, we don't want it. We don't want it.
I don't think they have I think they're losing an identity without Jordan Travis, right? Because Jordan Travis just has, I mean, one, he's experienced. He's got the calm demeanor to him. He can move with his legs, not even just like on the ground, but he can also extend some things at times. And I think you're just missing that element and that leadership a little bit, right? I mean, the defense, I think, stepped up a little bit. I think that Florida State's a good football team. It's just without Jordan Travis, I just think that team is very, very different. But we'll see what happens.
They certainly looked that way on Saturday. They absolutely look that way. They're going to have to bounce back.
It's a backup quarterback on Florida's side too, so it was weird.
I mean, Ryan, let me ask you this: if Florida State barely beats Louisville, let's say they beat them like in an ugly 20-17 game, it doesn't matter who wins the Pac-12 game. I mean, I think we both agree that whoever wins that game is going to be in.
They're going to be in. Yeah.
Georgia beats Bama, Michigan beats them. If Florida State beats Louisville in a really ugly game, and Texas just goes out there and destroys Oklahoma State, like 42-10. Would you make a case for having Texas in the playoff over Florida State? Because I think you have to be willing to look at the makeup of the current Florida State team. They're not the team that beat LSU because they don't have Jordan. I mean, fair or unfair, if the product that because this is the point I made last week, let's see what Florida State does first before we drop them in the rankings. Let's see what they do first. Well, I watched them on Saturday, and they looked mediocre without him. Now, if you go out there and you just curb stomp LSU, then it's like, hey, it was a rivalry game. You got got his bearings underneath him, and he's good to go now, right? But that's not how they looked. I mean, that's my justification, Ryan. What would you say to that?
I would still put Florida State in just because they're undefeated, right? Like, I mean, it's just I understand your point, and I think that it's a talking point from the committee perspective, but it's just hard to justify not putting an undefeated team in the playoff, from a major Power 5 conference. Like, I don't know. I would struggle to leave them off. I would very much struggle to do that.
And they would have 3 top 25 wins over Louisville, LSU, and Clemson. So it's going to be. I do not envy the committee if you're the committee, you're hoping for one of two things from Florida State: lose and make it easy for us, or dominate and make it easy for us. Because to your point, if they go out there and dominate Louisville, that's still a 10-2 football team that beat NC State, beat Notre Dame, beat Clemson. That's still a really good football team. And if you blow them out, okay. Florida State proved they had a rough first game, but they proved that they're a really good football team. You've got to be praying, like, please don't make it please don't make it an ugly 21-17 game or 20-14 game. Like, just make it easy for us one way or the other, because resume wise, Ryan, you are correct. I mean, they'd have a very good on paper resume, but it's just like that team would have no chance at going to the playoff and competing. And that's because of the injured quarterback. That's the tough part about it. That'll be interesting. And we'll find out tomorrow night.
We had a question for Bobby S. who says, what was the Holden Stace injury, and was it serious?
I'm not sure what it was. I believe it was a soft tissue thing, or because he went through warm-ups and tried to go. So, and they just ruled him out. So it wasn't like he tore a knee or, had something major, because they tried to get him ready to go and just chose not to. So he did go through warm up. So I'll still look into what he did, but I don't think it was anything serious at this point in time.
And then our next question was from Father David Penny, who says, "What is your preferred bowl matchup for Notre Dame this year?"
I mean, I'm kind of back and forth on that, Ryan, because there's two schools of thought on this one. Number one is, and I was talking with a buddy of mine about this the other day. He was advocating for playing Kansas State. He wants to play Kansas State. And I was like, okay, state your case on why you want to play Kansas State. And it made sense. And I think you'll at least understand where he's coming from, Ryan, even though I don't agree with him, but I understood it. He's like, I want to play a team that's got a really good defense because I want to see this offense get a game against a really good defense before we go into the offseason. I want to see if the offense is like really turned the corner, if they're just beating up on bad teams. And I was like, I understand that. And I think for like big picture of the program, like that makes a lot of sense. My counter was simply that I get that, but I still feel like the best thing for like I just want to play a team that can beat, number one, but number two, if you can, play a team that carries some weight. LSU would be that. Ole Miss, I don't know how much weight Ole Miss carries as far as like, because it really what it comes down to is 10-3 plus a win over name team is going to impact what more than anything else, Ryan? Recruiting. And that's really what it boils down to for me. I don't know that like beating Kansas State moves the needle from the standpoint of you went 10-3 as a team, right? And you got momentum as a team. No recruit's going to be like, oh man, I watched you guys play Kansas State. I'm coming to Notre Dame now because you beat Kansas State. It's going to be no different than if you go out and blow out Iowa State. That kid was already going to come and play for you anyway. Beating LSU can move the needle. Like, guys, we've played LSU 3 times in the last 10 years, and we beat them every time. You know what I mean? And we played against and shut down the Heisman Trophy winner, that kind of thing. But then in the flip side is if LSU has opt-outs, it's still LSU, right? I mean, it's still LSU. It's still beating an SEC team. And if you're able to do it, I mean, you'd obviously have to go out and do it because they're a talented football team on offense. But I just kind of always felt like if you're asking my preferred matchup, it's I always want to beat a bigger brand.
Yes.
You do, and that's my thing. You want to play and beat a bigger brand, either a bigger brand like an LSU or a team from a brand conference, which is that's the benefit of playing South Carolina last year. Hey, beat an SEC team. That's the benefit of playing Ole Miss. It doesn't necessarily move the needle per se because you're supposed to beat Ole Miss.
Yep.
But it'd still be a very good win. I just don't, would it move the needle from a recruiting standpoint more than beating Kansas State would? That's for sure. But I did understand his point though, Ryan, about wanting to play a team with a good defense so you're tested. That's why I was kind of hoping Tennessee would maybe be an option because I think Tennessee has a defense where if you can go out there and move the ball and score a lot of points on them, you say, you know what, that's a quality defense. It's not a great defense, but it's a quality defense, and you went out and mop the floor with them, because to me that would serve 2 purposes. That would give you that better challenge against a good, because his point was if you go out there and score 40 something points against LSU, so what? Their defense is terrible. You should do that. I get that. And that's why Tennessee I think was a good compromise potential team, because that's a brand, that's a big brand name, that's a hot team on the recruiting trail.
A lot of their guys play probably. There's not gonna be a lot of opt-outs from Tennessee.
Yes. Yeah. And they've got a quality, again, not a lights out, oh my gosh, you've answered all your concerns about Clemson and Ohio State and Louisville because you beat Tennessee. It's not that kind of defense, but it's still a quality defense, and you'd be able to gauge yourself. How did they do against Alabama? How'd they do against Georgia and Missouri? And then how'd we do against them? And you'd be able to evaluate that way. But I don't know that Tennessee's really an option anymore based on how the teams fell. But we'll see. We'll see.
I would be very okay with playing Ole Miss for the simple reason that they're a 10-2 football team that I think will be at full strength. And for me, I think that beating that team with everybody involved, Quinshon Judkins and Jackson Dart playing, and their defensive linemen playing, and Harris at wide receiver playing, I actually don't want to play LSU if that's the situation, because Shane Daniels isn't going to play, man. He's not going to play, in my opinion. I doubt it. Brian Thomas isn't going to play, most likely. Malik Neighbors probably isn't going to play.
Mason Smith.
So many kids that are going to opt out. Again, beating LSU on paper from a name perspective matters, but then we're going to hear the million things of well, you beat them without the maybe Heisman Trophy winner. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I don't know if that me from a me watching a football game, like that gets me super jazzed, right? Like I don't know if that would get me jazzed because it's like, okay, you beat Garrett Nussmeier, who's okay,
Right.
but like he's not that guy. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
The only it would be similar to the argument about last year in South Carolina, Ryan, is you'd say, yeah, but
Yeah,
we didn't have Aldrich Estime and Joe Alt and
right.
Cam Hart, and I mean, there's going to be some opt outs for Notre Dame too. Although I would anticipate LSU is going to have more, but yeah, and we'll see how it plays out. But it's going to be an interesting bowl matchup if they get an
It
SEC
is.
team again. It is,
I
but at the end of the
I
day,
definitely would like
they
an
need a
SEC
win.
team. I would definitely
Yeah,
like an SEC team regardless, though.
they need a
So
win. That's
all
the
due
thing.
respect to Kansas State. Like I like Kansas State. I respect Kansas State. I really like their head coach, but it just doesn't do that much for me, man. Just
No, it
doesn't do that
doesn't
much
move the
for me.
needle.
Doesn't
Yeah,
do it
it
for me.
doesn't move the needle. Again, and his argument about, you're playing a good defense, that kind is out the window now after what happened to them against Iowa State. So it's kind of like if you go out there against them and you run for a bunch of yards, you're like, well, didn't Iowa State have a freshman running back that just ran for like 1,000,000 yards? And Kansas State's given up,
276 yards.
and Ryan, they've given up over 200 rushing yards in 3 of their last 4 games.
Yep,
Kansas State. So they're not playing great defense down the stretch.
they're not.
And now the conversation he and I had was before the Iowa State game, and I'd be willing to
I
bet
wonder if his
he would.
opinion changed a little
I would
bit.
be. I mean,
Yeah.
because he's very good about that. He's very good about, like, I had this opinion, the facts on the ground
Yep.
change, and I'm allowing it to alter my opinion. So, but it'll be very interesting, very very interesting. Here's an interesting question, Ryan. I'm going to get your thoughts on from Team T Guns, and that his question was: should Jeff Lebby try to bring back Will Rogers to Mississippi State? To your point earlier, Jeff
Yeah.
Lebby's an air raid coach,
He
right?
is.
But it's a different type of when you argue it's a little bit different
Well,
type of air raid than what Will
I was
Rogers
gonna
did.
say, like, Jeff Lebby's track record, though, is that he does like the dual threat elements. I mean, you think
Right.
about Dylan Gabriel at UCF. You think about Dylan Gabriel now at Oklahoma. You think about he also had Matt Corral when he was at Ole Miss, who ran for like over 600 yards and 11 touchdowns his last year. I don't think Will Rogers is necessarily Jeff Lebby's type of quarterback. I'm not sure if that's the guy he actually wants under center. So, I mean, I think that for me, it's like you do your due diligence. The kid's been at Mississippi State. He's run the air raid. Like maybe you have the conversation with them. But I don't know if I was Jeff Lebby, if I would like push hard, like, dude, like we need you to come back. Like this is your team, blah, 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 blah. I think I would just look at other options potentially out there because I just don't know if he's necessarily his style of quarterback in the air raid. I think he wants a guy that can improvise a little bit, can do a little bit of quarterback run game stuff, can run some RPOs. Like that's just not Will Rogers. Will Rogers is a pure drop back air raid quarterback who is very statuesque. I'm just not sure that he's Jeff Lebby's type.
Let me ask you this, Ryan. Didn't the kid from Vanderbilt transfer there this offseason?
Mike Wright. Mike Wright.
Yeah.
Yep. He's
Does
there.
he have a year left?
I think he does. I'm pretty sure.
Don't you think if you're looking for a 1-year bridge between the current team, let's say he doesn't like the young players at Mississippi State,
Yep.
and he's not. I mean, Jackson Arnold's not going to follow him to Mississippi State, So let's say he's like, hey, I got to go find a young kid to groom, and maybe gets a high school kid. If you're looking for a bridge quarterback with what we think his offense is going to look like, because do you view him as more in line with what he would be? Because I'm not a big Mike Wright fan as a player, to be honest with you, but he is a guy with SEC experience who's a run throw quarterback. I mean, that's what he did at Vanderbilt. And that's what you do there. I would wonder if maybe that might be more of a bridge, because then he's also kind of guy that if you do have a young guy that kind of develops, you could just say, okay, Mike, thanks. But
Mississippi State's also not going to be a quick fix for me, right? Like you have to rebuild that roster. So I just know because like Mike Wright, an imperfect quarterback, there's no doubt about that. But his legs can get him out of trouble at times, right? Like you're like, okay, that can get you out of trouble. That's like a get out of jail free card. Will Rogers behind probably not a great offensive line with wide receivers that are still developing, probably young. I just don't know if that's a good bridge to the next year, right? Like I think Will Rogers just kind of needs new scenery, and Jeff Lebby needs to try to find a little bit more athleticism at position. I just legitimately do not think that he is what Jeff Lebby. Like if I asked Jeff Lebby, what do you want at the quarterback position? When he describes it, I do not think he would describe Will Rogers. I just do not think that's
correct.
His guy.
Correct. And honestly, here's an interesting topic of conversation. I don't think Jared Parker would describe Sam Hartman. And let's not forget, like, this is the thing you got to be careful of. If you're trying to make a transition in your offense, you want to make sure you have a quarterback that kind of fits what you want to do.
Sure.
And a buddy of mine said this to me yesterday. We were talking about portal quarterbacks, and I brought up a guy, he brought up a guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't like this guy." And I said, "Okay, why?" He goes, "Well, I don't think he's the kind of quarterback that Notre Dame's looking for." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, he's kind of a runner type." And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. Who's the only quarterback that we know was handpicked by Jared Parker and the staff?" And he thinks about it for a second. He goes, "It's Deuce Knight, right?" Exactly. Exactly. What does that tell you, right? Is he wants a guy that can move. And CJ Carr can as well, and Kenny Minchie can in different ways. They're not the runners that Deuce is, but they're good athletes that can move in the pocket and things like that. And I think that's kind of the quarterback that Jared Parker's looking for, and that's clearly the quarterback Jeff Lebby has always had. Because I believe Jeff Lebby was at Baylor back when they started to kind of get really good with Robert Griffin III, if I remember correctly. Is he was there during that period, because he was at Baylor from 2008 to 2016. So yeah, he was there during the Robert Griffin III era. And what was that? I mean, what was Baylor doing back then? I mean, they were throwing it a bunch, but they were a team that went out there and run throw quarterback, right? I mean, Robert Griffin III threw for over 4,000 yards the year he won the Heisman Trophy. He also ran for 699 and 10 touchdowns, right? Like, I know he's a little goofy now as a play-by-play guy, but he was a heck of a quarterback in college. Nick Florence was that way, Ryan. He threw for 4,000 yards and ran for over 500 yards. I mean, so again, when you look at Jeff Lebby, who was the pass game coordinator, who was the running backs coach and then the pass game coordinator for Baylor back in 15 and 16, he was there for a long period of time. Those are the kind of quarterbacks they had. I mean, they recruited Jarrett Stidham out of high school to run that offense.
Could run a little
bit. Jarrett Stidham was a run throw guy coming out of high school. Seth Russell was one of his starting quarterbacks who had over 500 yards rushing. So yeah, everything about his track record, not just at Oklahoma, in UCF, tells me that he wants a dual threat quarterback. And
right,
I think that's what they're going to be in the market for this offseason when they look in the portal. And I just think, to your point, Ryan, Mike Wright fits that a little bit more. I think that was a great point, though, about the O-line issues. If you're going to have some O-line issues, Mike Wright is definitely a guy you'd rather have there. Neither of them, to me, are SEC quarterbacks. Right. SEC caliber quarterbacks, unless, like I said, Will Rogers is a good SEC quarterback when Mike Leach is your coach. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
But
I just think what we saw of Will Rogers this year is more of what Will Rogers is compared to what we saw under Mike Leach, right? If we're talking about from a production perspective, like, I mean, all due respect,
impact versus talent. Yeah.
I mean, if you see what Mike Leach did historically with guys like Graham Harrell and BJ Simmons and Gardner Minshew's ended up being pretty solid pro, but like even Anthony Gordon that was at Washington State, it's like, these guys aren't great talents, man. He just understood offense. Like, he knew where to find soft spots and zones, and he knew where to attack defenses. I mean,
and he could teach
Mike Leach was a mastermind. Yeah,
he was, and he was a great teacher. He could teach his quarterbacks. Like, he was as good as you're going to find at teaching his quarterbacks to see the game the way he sees the game. That's why they were so good. He really was. The game is not as good without him in it. Just the personality, just the way he was. It's still get bummed out when I talk about him and his passing. So I'll keep moving on.
MT41, with staff choosing to not really get Kenny Minchie game reps, I'm starting to worry that the quarterback battle won't be much of a battle and they'll just hand the job to Steve Angeli. Should I be worried about this?
I mean, look, MT, I have the same questions you do about, I thought they should have played Kenny Minchie against Stanford. I agree with you there. All I can tell you is my conversations with my sources, that is not going to happen. Now, could Steve Angeli be the starter? Sure. If Steve Angeli goes out and wins the job, he'll be the starting quarterback. But I do not think that there is any intention at all from anyone at Notre Dame to just hand Steve Angeli the job. Number one, that's not good for Steve Angeli. Steve Angeli just being handed the job does not make him go through the battle of winning the job, which is going to make him more battle tested to be the starter if he is your best quarterback. You're doing him no favors by just handing him the job. I think what that was about is they're saying he won the backup quarterback job right now, and he deserves to do the things the backup quarterback deserves to do. I think that's what this is about. Now, I don't necessarily agree with it. We talked about in the show on Saturday. I think they should have done more to get Kenny Minchey in the game. I mean, Steve Angeli has proven who he is as the backup quarterback. He's gotten plenty of opportunities. Let me see what Kenny has to prove. But I also understand, if I was in Steve Angeli's shoes, how I would feel if, like, I won I earned the backup quarterback job and you're putting this other guy in the game. I mean, sure, I get that, but there is not a person that I've talked to in any way, shape, form or fashion that has any intention of just handing Steve Angeli the job. If Steve Angeli is the starting quarterback at Notre Dame in 2024, it's because Steve Angeli went out there every single day and outworked, outperformed, and outplays Kenny Minchey, CJ Carr, and whoever the portal quarterback is going to be. I am 100% certain of saying that. I don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be, Brian. No idea. But I can assure you of that. If it's Steve Angeli, and I'm saying this because I'm not a Steve Angeli guy. Everybody knows that. But I'm telling you, if that kid's the starting quarterback next year, that means he earned it. That flat out means he earned it, in my opinion. But I do understand your concerns, MT.
Well, and if the staff does do that and they just hand Angeli the job without having going through a legitimate quarterback battle, MT, in your scenario, then there's a lot of issues there, right? And from a coaching perspective, there's a lot of issues there. You need to see competition this offseason, right? I mean, Brian, last year, like, there was a legitimate battle between Sam Hartman, who had 110 career touchdown passes, and Tyler Buckner, who had 6 in his career or something like that. Like, I forget what number or what the touchdown passes he had in his career at Notre Dame were, but they had a legitimate battle. And I think it would be really backwards if you just said, like, Steve Angeli's your guy, right? Automatically, without a competition ensuing. There has to be a battle that comes from that, because I honestly think that's a little bit of BK PTSD building in a little bit. Like, what has Marcus Freeman showed us that, like, they're just going to be settled with the quarterback position,
Right.
and they're not going to bring in guys to battle for it, right? Like, what has he shown that's like an indicator of, like, that they're just going to settle for what they have on the roster? Because they could have settled this year if they wanted to, but they went and they got a kid in the portal. I mean, I don't have any issue. I don't have any. Like, there's nothing in the back of my mind that's like, man, I'm really worried about that right now. Like, I haven't even thought about that because Marcus Freeman hasn't shown me to be that guy, Like, he just hasn't shown me that.
I think that is a phenomenal point, Ryan.
Yeah.
If Notre Dame was going to hand a guy a job, it would have been Drew Pine or Tyler Buckner, or the two of them. I mean, that's who they would have. I mean, Tyler Buckner's far more accomplished than Steve Angeli is, because he's actually done it in starting minutes. I mean, what he did in the bowl game against South Carolina is far more impressive than anything Steve Angeli did against teams second and third string off defensive players. And that's not a knock on him. That's true of any backup quarterback who never got a spot start. Like with Ian Book, we kind of saw after 2017, we saw Ian Book make a spot start. We saw some of his limitations, some things he could do. But then we also saw him come off the bench against LSU in real live minute situations where he had to go win you a ball game, and he did it. Steve was never tested like that. And so Drew Pine was. So if they were going to hand a guy a job, they would have handed Tyler Buckner the job last year. Right. That's what they would have done. I think that's a great point, Ryan. So why would we think they're going to just hand Steve Angeli the job? Again, I can understand why MT looks at it, because they didn't get Kenny Minchey reps. But I also know this too, Ryan, from the staff standpoint, is they put a lot of value in what you do in practice, much more so than going in there and back. Like, fans make a lot more of what a guy did in the fourth quarter against the other team's backups than coaches do. It's a good chance for you to see your kid playing, and there's benefits to that. And you always like to see a guy on the field, but coaches aren't like, Notre Dame's coaches aren't like, well, Drake Bowen's starting Mike linebacker next year because of what he did in the fourth quarter against Stanford, right? No, Drake's going to have to go out there and earn it on the practice field every single day. And I can assure you that if they view Drake I'm just using him as an example. If they view Drake as that's the heir apparent at Mike, it's not because of what he did in the fourth quarter of a couple games. It's what he did Monday to Friday, the last 2 months of the season. And on defense and special teams. That's why. Now, it's nice to kind of get that confirmation of what the kid can do, but it's just such a different pressure situation And that's why I still say you had your missed opportunity against Central Michigan with a guy like him in that situation to start him and play him as in more of a starting role. But it is what it is. They did what they did. So yeah, I'm not concerned about that at all. I'm really not concerned with that at all.
Yep. Until it happened, until there's a situation that shows me that that could be a reality, I'm not going to worry too much about that. So, Michael S with the super chat says, with the constant mistakes he made, do you think Sam Hartman was uncoachable this year? Man, uncoachable is a big word, man. Like that's a big
No,
word for me, Michael.
I understand, Michael, where he's coming from, Ryan. I think what I would say, because I'm with you, Ryan, uncoachable speaks of a disrespect, a lack of like, I don't care what you have to say. I think it's very, what's the expression? It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. That's really what I think it boils down to. And when you do, it's going to be a situation where it's just he's going to go back to muscle memory, or it can create confusion and slowing down. I think it's those type of things. Like my dad asked me, I sent him a couple of those clips that I put on the board yesterday, like how he's just missing reads and you're just frustrated by it. He's like, "Did you see this at Wake?" And I was like, "No, I didn't see that at Wake." But at the same time, the film I watched of him at Wake was him 4 and 5 years into that system.
Sure.
I don't know that he had those issues as a freshman or a sophomore. I mean, so I understand where you're coming from, but number one is sometimes that's just who a guy is. He just that's who he is. And other times, this is the risk you run when bringing in a portal quarterback who's making the big transit. I'm not, this isn't a hindsight 2020. They shouldn't have done it. I think Notre Dame made the right move. They took their shot. It didn't work out the way that you'd hoped, but you took your shot, and you fail every single time you don't take a shot. You guarantee you're not going to hit it, right?
Yep.
And you don't not go to the portal because he didn't pan out, because you went 11-1 the last time you had a portal quarterback. Okay. But sometimes it's just not going to work out. And with Sam, I just think it didn't work out the way we would hope. But I don't think I've never heard a thing about Sam being uncoachable. It's just sometimes you just can't beat certain habits out of a guy.
Yeah, I mean, because the uncoachable word for me, Michael, it was just like it's like a guy just kind of brushing you off and saying like, "That's stupid. I'm not going to do that." Right? Like I've had kids that are uncoachable. Like I've had those guys, right? And I would say more to what Brian said is that I think, and this was probably a fault of myself, is that when you have a quarterback with so much experience, I think you just have this assumption that he is just going to retain knowledge so quickly and he's going to change those habits and he's going to be able to really take on a different offense and make it his own very quickly. When in reality, it's a thing that takes a lot of time, man, to break habits for one, to get used to an offense for two. And I think that, again, like I don't know what Sam Hartman's retention of knowledge is, for instance. Right. Like I do NFL draft evaluations. It's like, what's the hardest part of projecting quarterbacks? Not knowing what they know on the board, right? Not knowing what they are as leaders on the field. And from all indications, Sam Hartman is a good leader. And I never heard a word negative about Sam Hartman as a person. But a 1-year transition to a completely different system is a difficult task. And it is a difficult task to retain that knowledge and to make it functional in an offense as well. So I just think that it was not a good fit necessarily. I think that Sam did probably the best that he could in the situation in a short amount of time. I don't really fault either side for this. Unfortunately, just wasn't a fit that worked out to the best of what we expected it to be. And it is what it is. But I think that that's just kind of my thought process on it. Is maybe it just wasn't a great fit. Maybe it wasn't a seamless transition that we thought maybe it could be with a 6-year starting quarterback. That's just, kind of my thought process there.
I also think we can't ignore the fact that he was the guy that Tommy Rees picked, and his offense, I believe, fits a little bit more of what Tommy Rees liked to do, a little bit more than what Jared Parker likes to do.
Yeah.
That's part of it as well. And when you as a coach have to adapt to a guy that's not your necessarily preferred style, it can create some issues as well. And the last quarterback that Gino Gaduli coached up, for example, what's the guy that we give praise for? Desmond Ridder.
Yeah.
Desmond Ridder and Sam Hartman are very different quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Who's a lot like Desmond Ridder?
Sam Hartman's not 6'3", 220, runs a 4.5.
Right.
He's not that
now,
guy.
who does have some similarities to Desmond Ridder? Deuce Knight, right? CJ Carr. Those guys are much more similar in style of play than Sam Hartman. And that's, again, like you said, Ryan, I've heard nothing but people players, coaches, they respect. Now, do certain receivers kind of ready for Sam to be gone? I'm sure, but it's not personal. It's just guy doesn't look at me. You know what I mean?
Style
But
fit.
they all
Yeah.
respect him. No, I've never heard anyone say a bad word about the kid as a worker, as a
Yeah.
I got issues with him as a player, Ryan, this year. I do. But I have never heard a single bad word about Sam Hartman, the young man, the leader,
Right.
that type of stuff at all. Nothing.
I would have been I'm very interested because I think that if Notre Dame brings in a quarterback this offseason out of the portal to contend for a starting spot, I think that would be a much bigger indicator of like what Jared Parker wants as a quarterback. Because I honestly I'm kind of curious now. I mean, obviously we'll never know the answer to this, but if Jared Parker was the offense coordinator this time last year, would he have looked at Sam Hartman? Would that have been the guy that he wanted? I don't
You
know the answer to
you
that,
know
you
who
know?
I think he would have gone after of what I know of Jared
Hudson
Parker?
Card. Hudson
Bingo.
Card. Yeah,
Bingo.
makes
I think
sense. Yeah.
that's the guy he probably would have targeted. And that's I mean, he wasn't the OC. I mean, Tommy was. I mean, it's just the breaks. But yeah, I just want to be clear, guys. I'm very critical of the play of Sam Hartman the second half of the year, but that's about him as a football player. I have never ever had an ill feeling towards him as a young man. I respect how, like, there's I kind of talked about senior day. I just thought it was a little cringy that like they made Sam Hartman to be like how they were when Manti had senior day and Zach Martin had senior day. And I'm like, of all the kids that have been here 4 and 5 years, that's the guy you're bringing out last and all that. But number one, he's a quarterback. But number two, like one of the reasons, and a guy, I can't remember who it was, some Notre Dame Twitter account had a response to what I said was, I don't know if he said it to me or somebody else, but he's like, part of the reason Sam Hartman is loved because of how much he embraced Notre Dame. He was one of us immediately. And you don't do that if you're just here to get a paycheck and go to the NFL. Like he embraced everything about Notre Dame. And you don't do that if you're an uncoachable guy. You're a bad attitude. You're like, dude, I'm here to help you, right? You know,
Right.
you're not here to help me. So yeah, I think that's the reason why a lot of fans did embrace Sam Hartman is because he embraced Notre Dame and everything about Notre Dame. And I think he'll always be much as Jack Cohn did. Sam's just a little bit more outgoing
Right.
than Jack Cohn was. You know, Jack was a very quiet, reserved guy, but Jack Cohn was very much became a very quickly a Notre Dame man, just like Sam
Right.
Hartman did.
Sure.
Absolutely. All right. Good question. You guys are on fire today. Here's some really good questions. MT has another really good one here, Ryan.
MT says, with Michigan's greater on-field success over Notre Dame the past couple of years, why has Notre Dame been so dominant over them in recruiting? Well, I think Michigan set themselves back a little bit, MT, for a little bit there because every single year you had to deal with the rumors of Jim Harbaugh going to the NFL, and I think that hurt recruiting a little bit. I also think that Notre Dame just generally probably has a better recruiting staff than Michigan does. I think Michigan's got a lot of really good football coaches, but as far as recruiting, I mean, I think Jim
There's been
Harbaugh
a
is a
lot of
fine
turnover
recruiter.
there too, Ryan. I mean,
There has
they've
been a
had
lot
a
of turnover.
lot of staff turnover.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
Jesse Minter's a really good defensive coordinator, but I mean, 2 years ago, the coach that's now the defensive coordinator for Baltimore Ravens was their defensive coordinator. So they definitely have
yeah,
had some turnover.
Josh Gaddis left, and
Yep.
he was a good recruiter. Then he gets replaced by a guy who gets fired because of an investigation. I mean, like the drama didn't just start this year at Michigan. Like
Right.
there's been weird stuff going on for a couple years now. I think you nailed it with the better recruiting staff, Ryan. I think the other thing too is with Michigan, it's like it's very much a now moment with Jim Harbaugh. To your point,
Mhm.
even if he does stay, is he going to leave? But at the same time, also it's like with Notre Dame, it's kind of like it's the young, energetic head coach. You can be part of something special. I think
Right.
that's part of it too. But I think the way that they play on offense isn't a really sexy offense that unless you're an offensive lineman or running back, you're not going to be beat down the door to go if you're a receiver to go play in that offense where at least Notre Dame can still sell. We want to be something different. That's why we need you. I mean, Jim Harbaugh's been there so long where like that doesn't work anymore. So I think that's part of it as well. I did want to address something here real quick. I
Yep.
am working on a story right now. It's something I'm working on in between answering questions, but Nana Osafa-Mensah has entered the portal, the transfer portal. So Nana will not, at least as of right now, it looks like he will not be back at Notre Dame next year. Not overly surprised by this, but still a little bummed because I kind of thought there'd be a notion of him coming back and maybe being a good leader and that type of thing. And I doubt that Notre Dame was willing to offer him a guaranteed starting job, but just got to thank Nana for the job he did this year, man. We talked about the other day, Ryan, but for a kid like that to just embrace taking the backup role to a portal guy and showing the leadership that he did and playing the way he did when he did get in the game, got a lot of respect for what that kid did.
No doubt, man. I mean, and he's you mentioned already a little bit, but that kid is a leader. I mean, again, he's a perfect example of you don't need the C on the chest to be a leader. You don't. And Nana is one of those guys where he's a tremendous leader. And he outplayed my expectations for him this year, to be honest. I thought Nana would just be fine, but like there were a couple games where I'm like, all right, Nana, good job, buddy. Like you did, especially last game. I mean, he was fantastic this past game against Stanford. So Nana was a great leader, was a tough, gritty kid who played his butt off every single snap. There's no doubt about it. And there's going to be some great offseason question marks about the big end position now, right? Because you're going to lose Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Now with losing Nana Asafamensa, you have some young kids in the wings, right? Like you have Brennan Vernon, who's a true freshman this year. Hopefully you have Aiden Gabira coming back from injury that will be into the conversation next season at the big end position. But you have some question marks as far as what the big end position is going to look like. Tyson Ford, like you have some question marks.
I also anticipate one of Junior or Burnham moving over there as well in certain looks. Now, whether it's a full-time move or not remains to be seen, but I also think we could see something like that next season as well.
I'm interested to see what happens, like, do you bring in another guy to have depth at that position? Like, I don't know the answer to that, but hey, I think you said it perfectly though, Brian. First and foremost, Nana, graduate of Notre Dame, ambassador of Notre Dame, played his butt off. You could depend on him every single day, and he was a great leader. So nothing negative ever to say about that.
Love the kid.
This is the right kind of transfer, right? He gave everything to the University of Notre Dame that you asked of him. You got it. You got your degree. You played your butt off in every role that you had at Notre Dame, and you were a leader. And that's good for him, man. Good for him. Go play. Go ball out. Go get some more playing time and see what you can do as a full-time player. Love to see it.
Yep. And this is the old school portal stuff. This is the stuff that used to happen back in the day where kids would graduate, do your time, and you get that reward by getting that fifth-year opportunity where you can transfer wherever you want to transfer to. So, Ryan, I'm going to ask this next question because I'd like for you to address it, and I'm going to continue working on this article while you are addressing it. Coleman Smith asks, would you bring Maris Leofau back to pair with Boubacar Traore and Josh Burnham at Viper? Jordan isn't cutting it. The weight gains has affected his rush.
I wouldn't bring Coleman. I wouldn't bring him back just to be a Viper, right? Like the only reason I would bring Maris back is if Maris was okay with some young guys getting a lot of playing time, right? Like there's not a Maris Leofau's coming back and he is the de facto Will 1 and there's no other guy that's even close from a snap share perspective. I want to see some young cats play next year, right? Like I want to see Nolan Ziegler and Jay Nosberry and Drake Bowen and all those guys inside, Jalen Sneed. I want to see those guys. So Maris has to be okay with understanding that you are going to have to let up some numbers. You have to. Second, that doesn't change his role as far as special teams. You need to play special teams and you need to be a part of the team and be that type of guy, which I don't have any reason to think that Maris won't accept that role as much as the defensive side of the ball. But Coleman, to your question, if that means Maris comes back in that capacity and I can get some Viper reps out of him on specialized downs, on obvious pass situations, then I would think about it for sure. But I'm not moving him full-time to Viper because I'm excited about some of the young Vipers that are on the roster. Like I want to see Boubacar Traore play more. If Joshua Burnham stays there, I want to see him. I want to see if Logan Thomas can get into the conversation of playing a lot or playing a little bit as a freshman. I want to give those guys opportunities. So if Maris accepts a role as I'm a part of the rotation, but I'm not the full rotation, and I can have versatility and I will play special teams, then I'd be okay with Maris coming back. But there has to be an understanding of this is not just your position, right? Like we're not doing that, seniority thing when you're not playing. Like I know he was Bednarik finalist or whatever, or semifinalist or whatever, which was just absolutely laughable. But he could be a valuable part of the team if he chooses to take that role. I'm just not necessarily sure if he would be, okay with taking that role. So in a specialized situation, I would take him back, but it would not be a yes, automatic yes. There would be some thought and process to go into this conversation.
Ryan, we were incorrect. Nana
Okay.
Osafo-Mensah did not get a degree from Notre Dame in 4 years. He got 2.
Good for him, man.
Yep, he got 2.
I'm not surprised about that at all.
He said that in his announcement. He says after earning 2 degrees from the University of Notre Dame. I love that. Absolutely love that. Because he's a 4-year guy. He was a 19, 20, 21, 22. No, actually, he's a 5th-year guy. So he's a 5th-year guy now. He's going to take his 6th year. So that means he probably has a master's now too, Ryan, if he was here 5 years.
He is another example. What's the Notre Dame man look like, Brian? He is going to be he's going to be a great situation after football ends for him. Yes. Great situation. Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Here's one, Ryan.
We had 5 Burkhart boys who said, can we talk openly on how Sam Hartman just didn't cut it at Notre Dame? Why do you think he wasn't the guy? Pressure? Was being the Notre Dame quarterback just too much for him? His skill level, talent around him, coaching? It's a deep question, man. There's a lot. I think there's a lot that goes into it. 5 Burkhart boys. I would say for me, what were the biggest issues with Sam Hartman transitioning Notre Dame? I think one, just the general transition of different offense, only 1 year under the belt, breaking some bad habits. I think that set him back a little bit. I do think that there were some points where maybe play calling could have been a little bit better to make things a little bit more advantageous and a little bit easier for Sam Hartman at times. I also think that wide receivers having a million hamstring injuries in the most important section of the season in the middle didn't help anything at all, because then you're losing practice time. You're losing that connection consistently. So I'm a big believer. I've said this in nauseam at this point. It's a little bit of everything. It's not just a Sam Hartman thing. It's not just a Notre Dame thing. There's a lot that I think went into him just not being his best version of himself, or at least our expectations were for Sam Hartman. So that's just kind of my thought process, Brian. I think it's a little bit of everything that kind of correlates to it.
Yeah, I also want to say, I don't know that I would say he didn't cut it at Notre Dame. He wasn't as good as he should have been and could have been, but he wasn't a failure. It was, if we're going to just kind of be like you won a championship or not, and if you didn't, it's a failure. Okay, fine. I mean, that's fine. But I've always said there's a lot. That's the macro evaluation of the season, but the micro is a lot more. There's a lot more to it than that, Ryan. And, we're talking about a guy that wasn't as good as he should have been. He still threw 24 touchdown passes and had a quarterback rating that will be the highest quarterback rating that Notre Dame has had at quarterback from a full-time starter since Jimmy Clausen back in 2010. I mean, or 2009, excuse me. He's got the best quarterback rating that they've had in a while, I think. So it wasn't a complete failure. And he had some very good games in Notre Dame. He just wasn't good enough in the big moments, which is sort of a microcosm of the entire team, especially the offense this season. Was it pressure? No, I don't think it was pressure. Was being the Notre Dame quarterback too much for him? No, I think that's all way overthinking it. I just don't think he made the transition. The transition was just a little bit too much for a guy to make in 1 year. And yeah, I just think that's had a lot to do with it. Talent around him, sure. I mean, like Ryan, I think you nailed, like all the injuries they had and things like that. That all factored into it, of course. Yep. But at the end of the day, there was too many opportunities for him to make some of those plays that he just didn't make. And, there's make all the excuses that we want, but he just needed to make some more of those plays. But it also could have been worse. If Sam Hartman's not their quarterback, did they beat Duke? I don't know. I just kind of look. You took your shot. It didn't work out. He did some good things. Did some things you wish he would have done better. He competed his butt off and he embraced Notre Dame. And whoever the next portal quarterback is, if it's a guy that's going to come in and start, it's going to have to be, to me, more seamless fit to what they were trying to do. And I honestly think just the timing for him didn't work out. I really do. I still wonder what this offense would have looked like if he had Tommy Rees as the OC than Jared Parker. And that's not to say Tommy Rees is better or worse or anything like that. It's just that's who Tommy wanted. Tommy wants to run an offense one way. Jared Parker would like to run an offense a little bit of a different way. And I don't think that that if Tommy Rees would have left the day after the USC game last year, to your point, I don't think Sam Hartman's the quarterback that they would have gone and got in the portal. I think it would have been like a Hudson Card type of guy. I just do. And what's my evidence? Who has he recruited in high school quarterbacks since they got here? Since it's a different deal. So I just think all those things factored in. It just all went together. But I never felt like Sam didn't handle the pressure. He didn't play well against Stanford or against Clemson this year. I just watched him rip Clemson up last year. I don't think he was afraid of playing Clemson, or the pressure of playing Clemson. Now, playing Clemson as the starting quarterback in Notre Dame, sure, yeah. But I just think that by that point in time, he was kind of already mentally too far gone to be able to play. Whereas last year against Clemson, that was the fourth time he'd played them in the same offense. And, with guys he'd been playing with for 4 years, and it just was a different scenario. I think that really has to come down to it, which is why I still believe, Ryan, if you're going to go to a portal quarterback who's a 1-year guy, you got to get a guy that can move. You've got to get a guy that when things break down or he's uncomfortable can do more damage with his legs than what Sam Hartman can do. I think that's the great equalizer for some of those things. And that's just my 2 cents.
I agree.
Great questions today. Here's one. This is a good recruiting one, Ryan. I'll answer this one from Ant VR. With Mike Elko going to Texas A&M and safety recruiting only in an okay spot, any chance Notre Dame takes this last second shot at Paul Menke Jr.?
Someone asked us on the message board. No, that's not a avenue that I would anticipate Notre Dame going down. Notre Dame has 3 safeties committed in the 2024 class. I think that's the number that they want to stick to as of today, right? So they have Bronte Johnson, they have Tabron Benny Powell, they have Kennedy Urlacher, and that whole, I don't know if we ever disclosed it on the message board, but like the whole Paul Menke situation was just a little bit odd, right? And both Notre Dame kind of made a decision that they were just going to kind of stop at that point, right? Recruiting him. So that is not a situation. That is not a player that I would anticipate Notre Dame taking a second look at. No, I think Notre Dame is done at safety in 2024.
Yeah, that was, and I don't know how much we even want to say about that, but it was a very odd situation.
It's like a water cooler conversation at a. It's like an IB.
It's a tailgate
conversation. Yeah,
it's just kind of like, I don't think this is going to fit. This is the right fit, and I think it was sort of a mutual parting of ways. Let's just put it that way. So, it was same with the other kid that picked Texas Tech. It's like Oliver Miles. They liked him a lot, but then the visit was just kind of like, that's why visits are so important, man. That's why they're so important, because you're like, this is just not a fit here. Just not a fit here.
Yeah.
So you just wish they would have kind of been able to kind of find some of that stuff out sooner.
Yeah.
Here's another question that is I think a good Ryan Roberts question from Nathan Milton. Is Notre Dame better at producing NFL offensive line tackles, guards, or centers? Let's just kind of focus on like the last 10 to 15 years, not so much all time.
I mean, I think when you look at it, I mean, Notre Dame had a string since Zach Martin, as far as like their left tackle had gone in the first round of the NFL draft, that kind of ended at Liam Eichenberg, who went in the second round. So I think offensive tackle is my impulse. But I mean, honestly, Nathan, the reason that Notre Dame is offensive line U is because the answer is yes, for the most part, right? I mean, right now you have Ronnie Stanley, who I know is struggling a little bit this year, but he's been a very good left tackle when healthy for the Ravens. You have Mike McGlinchey, who broke the bank this past offseason at right tackle, now playing with the Denver Broncos. You have Joe Alt now waiting in the wings. You have Liam Eichenberg playing guard on the next level, but Aaron Banks is playing good football. You have Robert Hainsey playing in the NFL. You have a lot of guys that are playing that are good football players, a whole lot. I think the one spot is center hasn't been like stellar, from an NFL perspective. I mean, like Robert Hainsey was getting a look at center, but otherwise it's like Sam Mustipher grabbed on for a few years. Nick Martin grabbed on for a few years, but it wasn't like you're putting out like these high profile guys necessarily. I think Nick Martin ended up going in the second round, but he was a little bit overdrafted. But so I think offensive tackle, offensive guard over center, but you have to cover all bases when you are offensive line U, and Notre Dame has done a great, I mean, literally Notre Dame could, if you just took the line in the NFL right now of just Notre Dame players, you would have an above average starting offensive line in the NFL, probably one of the better ones in the NFL right now. So, yeah, Notre Dame's offensive line, because they do a little bit of everything.
Let's go to the next one, Ryan. Here's one. Let's go here.
Nathan Milton says, why do you suspect Jadarian Price is not more utilized in the offense?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I believe, number one, they found other ways to get him the football as the team's kick returner. Number two, I think Notre Dame was very careful to not overwork him this year, coming back from the Achilles. I think when you look at the depth they did have, the players they did have, there was really no need to really give more than he could really. You just because, like, once you get that point of no return on an Achilles, once the fit, and I'm not even talking about like being injured again. It's just when you're year one back from an Achilles, there's a fatigue factor on that part of your body, the tendons and all those type of things. And medical people can explain it more, to where once it goes, it's gone. Meaning, like, you're not going to get it back without rest. I don't mean injury. I just mean you've kind of lost. Like, you ever been at the gym and you've lifted so much? It's been a while for me, but you lift so much where you're tired. And like things you can normally bench, you're knocking out. Now you're like,
you're exhausted.
Because right. Well, it kind of can hit that point and just kind of lingers for a while. And resting it isn't like taking a day off or, and getting it back to the gym on Thursday. It's more of like, you need a few weeks off. And so they had to make sure they didn't push him to that point this season. And when you have Jabron Payne serving the role he had, you have Jeremiah Love doing what he had, you were able to get Jadarian some touches in the return game that helped him continue to work his way back, that wasn't putting such a heavy load on him. And so I think those are things that factor. I mean, the kid had 9 kick returns this year and averaged over 35 yards per return, and had 39 touches on offense. And he'll and if Audric Estime doesn't play in the bowl game, and I don't know if he will or won't, we shared our opinion. We would, just based on recent history, I would assume he doesn't. But maybe he wants to get the record. Maybe he wants to get the single season rushing record, whatever. Then for me, he'll play more in that game, But to me this year, it was get him through the year, get him some experience, and get him through the year healthy, Ryan. To me, that was the primary objective of Jadarian Price, and they did that. They did exactly that. And I'll say it now, and I'm going to write an article about it once the, all the decisions have been made. But if Notre Dame has Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price as their 1-2 punch next year at running back, it's going to be a more dynamic, more explosive, more productive version of what we saw 2 years ago with Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. Those are both very good running backs. But my whole thing is, I said it the other day, a 30-yard run for Audric Estime, there are some 30-yard runs Audric Estime had this year that if it's one of those two kids, might go for 60. And you saw it on the one little inside zone 12-yard gain he had near the goal line, or in the red zone for Jeremiah Love. He just shot. He got through that hole, Ryan, like a missile, right? And Jadarian's got some of that too. I mean, go back and look at
Jeremiah Love
gets
a little more. Just wait till Jeremiah Love gets a little bit more patience in his game, because then he's going to explode, man.
And weight room strength too, Ryan, because the weight room stuff too, because he runs hard for a 190-pound running back. But go back and look at Jadarian Price's first carry of the year that went for a 19-yard touchdown. Those kids get through the hole at just a different gear. And I think your point, it was great for Jeremiah watching Audric yesterday. Understand, like, hey, guy, you can go 1,000,000 miles an hour, but sometimes you need to go at 20 miles an hour while you wait for that blocking to set up, then accelerate to 100, right? And he'll learn all that. That's all part of the learning process. And so I think it was great that they got both of those guys experience. But with Jadarian, it was get him some experience, keep him healthy.
Yep.
Mission accomplished, in my opinion. Mission accomplished. It's a good question, Nathan. Good question.
Running back room next year is going to be ridiculous, man. It's not even going to make any sense.
Oh, yeah.
With Keedron and Aeneas coming in too, it's like, all right, guys. All right.
Yep, absolutely.
Bobby asked with a question. What do you think some of these fringe guys do? Stay, go pro, or go to the portal? I guess we're going to go one by one here and make a prediction. Zeke Correll, stay, go, or go pro, or go to the portal.
I don't know How about this, Ryan? I don't know that I would know if guys are going to go pro or the portal. Let's just say, will they be back or not? How about that?
Okay,
Can we
stay
can
or
we do it
go.
that
Stay
way?
or go.
Yeah,
Yeah, stay or go.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I would say go.
I would say go as well. Andrew Kristofic, I would also say go.
Hmm.
Tosh Baker, I would say stay.
Hmm.
Tosh Baker. Kevin Bauman,
Go.
go as
I
well.
mean, there's just no reason to bring him back. With all due respect to Kevin, he hasn't been
Yeah.
able to stay healthy.
Yep.
He's already graduated. He's a senior, right? He's going to get beat out. The guys that are just better than him. I mean, they
Yep.
just are.
Yep.
So I don't see any reason to bring him back.
Devin Ford, I would say go.
Yep, agree.
Nana Safamensa has been answered for us. He is
We know
going.
we know the answer to that one now. Yes, yes, we do.
Interesting one who I actually thought played pretty well in his limited opportunities, but Aiden Kiana Ana, defensive tackle.
I wish they would bring him back. I just don't think Al Washington really has a lot of. I just don't think it's. I don't want to get into it, but
Yeah.
I just don't think Al Washington views him the way that we do. So I'd be a
Okay.
little surprised if he was back. I would like to see him back for the same reason that you went and recruited Sean Sevillano.
Yeah.
You know,
I thought
but
Aiden played pretty well, didn't he,
I
last game? Like
agree.
I was like, all right, looked pretty good. Like
I
I don't
agree.
know. Whatever.
You
All right.
and I are on the same page there, Ryan.
Yeah.
This isn't me. This isn't me saying I don't like him.
Yeah.
It's more I just don't know that the staff and the position coach views him the way that maybe
It's fair.
I do, which is fine.
It's fair. Very fair. All right, linebackers. So let's go to JD Bertrand first. I'm gonna say
Go.
go. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Maris Loifa, I'm gonna say go, but again, that's a conversation for me.
Yeah. And then Jack Kaiser, I'd say go as well.
You think all three go? It's
I,
possible.
I'm leaning. I would see I could see Maris coming back before the other two.
Okay.
For reasons you and I mentioned, because there is so much positional flexibility with him and so much special teams opportunities. Maybe this is just my opinion. I just think it's time to turn the page at linebacker. I love what those kids did. Thank you all so much, but it's time to turn the page. But I think one of the three will come back. I think it's time to kind of move on. But let's see what Jalen Sneed and Jaden Alsbury and Drake Bowen and Nolan Ziegler and Kingston Viliama Asa and you're going to get Keanu Kia back next year. And then I know you don't want to count on him because he's coming back off the mission. Maybe he's a special teams guy and maybe 25 might be more of a time. But you got Preston Zinter, who Marcus Freeman announced today was the scout team player of the week last week and a talented player. It's just kind of, to me, it's kind of red time to, you're going to be young next year. Bite that bullet, but you're going to be really athletic, really talented and explosive. And I just say, and that's why I think too, I think that's why maybe Marist might be a better option, but you could also make a case for Jack being back, have that veteran presence and that leadership and a special teams guy like the case that you've made in the past for him, so I could see that as well.
And then the last one is Ramon Henderson. I would say go, but I don't really have a great feeling on that one.
I mean, I understand why they want to bring him back because that's a position where the numbers are really shaky. I think your decision with Ramon Henderson is going to be tied into the decision that happens with Xavier Watts. I think if Xavier leaves, it's going to be tough to also tell Ramon to leave because then it's Antonio Carter and Ben Minnick and Don Schuler and all the young guys and Luke Talich and all the young guys, the incoming freshmen. I don't know that that's necessarily what I mean. Are you going to get a better portal safety than Ramon Henderson? I don't know. Right. It's not that there aren't better portal safeties out there. It's like, are you going to get those guys that are better? Right. That's the bigger question mark. And so if Xavier Watts comes back, I'd be okay if Ramon left. But if Xavier Watts leaves and you lose him, DJ and Ramon, it's a lot of turnover at the safety position in one offseason. A lot of turnover.
That's fair.
So would you kind of see it that way too, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I'm curious to see. I think you've made a great point, and I would 100% agree that I think the tipping point is Xavier Watts' decision from there, right? Because I mean, I would like to see. I mean, if Xavier comes back, then it's like that second safety position. Now I can mix in those younger guys plus Antonio Carter trying to be that next safety, this second starting safety with depth. So we'll see, man. We'll see.
Along those same lines, we have this one from ND Estimate Trucking, Ryan, about that.
Well, and they said, assuming Joe Alt, Zeke Correll, and Andrew Kristofic are all gone after the season, what is your ideal two deep on the offensive line?
I mean, look, right now, I'm just going to kind of go with. It's really hard for me to say ideal because I don't know where certain guys are going to play. Right now, for example, we saw Charles Jagasol playing at the end of the year at
Left
guard,
guard.
not
Yeah.
tackle.
Yeah.
So that makes me think that they view the next year starting, tackles as Blake Fisher on one side and Tosh Baker on the other, with Emil Wagner as your next tackle in, and then maybe a Sullivan Absher or a Gearby Lambert as sort of your next tackle in. And then at guard, you've got I think Billy Schrouth, I would imagine, comes back battling for that job. Do you make him battle with Rocco again, or do you make Rocco battle with Pat Coogan? That would be a fair question, right? That's something I would be curious about. I would much rather see because I still think Rocco has the higher ceiling. I think when Rocco was at his best this year, he was better than Pat Coogan at his best. I think Pat was a little bit more steady than Rocco was, a little bit more consistent than Rocco was. I'm not sure if you agree with that or not, Ryan.
Yeah,
but I also feel like Rocco would have been a much better suited to execute the offense we saw the last 2 weeks, which is just downhill, boom. They kept asking Rocco to pin and pull, and that's not his game. No. What's funny is they had an athletic enough offensive line to do that the last 2 games and didn't do it, which was smart because you don't want to ask those young kids to do a lot. But we saw Billy Schrouth had a pull. I don't know if you saw this, Ryan. Billy Schrouth had a pull. They ran power on Saturday, and Billy Schrouth came around quickly and drilled a linebacker. And you're like, that's what a pull is supposed to look like at the University of Notre Dame, But, so you got those 3, and then Sam Pendleton got some playing time on Saturday. He looked good, I thought. You've got Charles Jagasol potentially there.
Sam Pendleton's very, very developed for his age, man.
Yes,
like he looked like he could have told me he was a junior, and I've been like, "Yep, looks like a junior to me." Sure.
That's a lot of guards there, Ryan, and a couple of them. That's why I'd still say I'd like to see Jagasol bumped back outside and see if he can play tackle or not. If he can't, then you can always move him back inside. But I'd give him that shot to play tackle, and I think you almost have to do it if Blake Fisher also leaves. But this question does not work with the premise that he leaves. So I think that would be it. And then you'd have Ashton Craig as your center. And I think Joe Otting they've talked about as the next in line behind him. They really like Joe Otting a lot. He's got to get bigger and stronger and all that. But from everything I've heard, like Ashton Craig's the future at center, but they feel like Joe Otting's got a chance to be that guy after Ashton's gone. And honestly, with Ashton's potential, it's not a given that he's going to be a 5th-year guy, in my opinion. Especially with him getting some starts under his belt this year. So we'll see how it plays out. Here's a recruiting question, Ryan. So I'll go ahead and ask this one for you.
Yep.
These next 2 are going to be more for you, Ryan, because the next one's an NFL draft question. What is the timeline for some of the guys that we're on really good shape for? Ike Taylor being one. Owen Streebig
Ivan Taylor?
Ike Taylor.
You said
Excuse me,
Taylor.
Ivan Taylor. Ivan Taylor.
Yes.
Keep wanting to call him his dad. Ivan Taylor.
Yes.
Sorry, Ivan. I know you're your own man. Ivan Taylor, Owen Streebig, Damian Shanklin, and the Connecticut teammates of Maddie Augustine and Ethan Long.
Sure. Yeah. So timeline for Ivan Taylor. I mean, I think I put out the intel. Well, I put out another article recently on Ivan Taylor, but my one that I did about a week or 2 ago, Ivan had said once the season was over and everything had settled down that he would make a decision. So I would anticipate something happening probably before the new year as far as a decision being made for Ivan Taylor. That's kind of the timeline I'd see. I would be very surprised if he went into January of 2024, not committed to whatever school he ends up choosing. So Ivan Taylor, I think that timeline looks like that right now. Owen Streebig is one that we've talked about a ton because it's very interesting. He has talked a lot about wanting to take official visits after junior year and doing all that type of stuff and then making a final decision before senior year starts. I just wouldn't be shocked if that gets moved up a little bit. I really would not be shocked if that happens, right? So we'll see if the timeline changes, but he will say, out there that it's after OVs before senior year starts. But we'll see. I think that's one that could tentatively change. Damian Shanklin's in no sort of rush to make a decision at all. When you ask him about timelines, he just says, I'm not sure about that yet. I'll kind of know when I know type of situation. So there's nothing firm there. And then Ethan Long, I had an update about 2 weeks ago. Ethan Long had told me that he is aiming also for a December decision, right? December decision. So he's before the new year type of thing. Maddie Augustine, similar to what I just said about Damian Shanklin, doesn't put firm timelines out there, right? So him, Shanklin, not a firm timeline out there. Ethan Long, potentially a December decision to be made. Ivan Taylor before 2023 is over. I would anticipate something happening there. Owen Strebig after junior year, taking his OVs, making the decision, but I could see that one getting moved up if everything goes well.
Good stuff. Next question, Ryan, from ND Estimate Trucking. This is more of an NFL draft question.
Okay.
I'm gonna answer one of them, Ryan, because I want to see if I can get something right on NFL draft. Right, I want to try and get it right. And you're gonna laugh when I say it because I think you and I agree on this. Brian and Ryan, I never understood why these players were first rounders. Can you explain it? He brings up Quentin Johnston from TCU, Kenny Pickett, quarterback at Pitt, Najee Harris, running back at Alabama, Jameson Williams, running receiver at Alabama, and then Jerry Tillery. I'll tell you why Jerry Tillery was overrated, because he was considered a very good pass rusher. And the NFL is a league where they look for interior pass rushers. That's why I think Jerry Tillery had no business being a first NFL draft pick. But I can see it. He's he's big and very athletic for his size, and was a productive pass rusher as a senior. That's why.
You were going to bet on those traits. So you can't teach a kid to be 6'6", 300 with no bad weight on him and be athletic like Jerry was, right? Yeah. So people bet on the traits, even though the film was very inconsistent. And I always had a question of like Jerry just putting great weight on his frame a little bit, right? Because like he never seemed like a natural 300 pounder to me either. Like he always seemed like very sleek, and like it was a little tough for him to gain weight. For the rest of them, Quentin Johnston, and a little bit of the same thing we just said about Jerry Tillery. Quentin Johnston was 6'3", ran in the 4.4s, had a 40-plus inch verts, and could jump out the gym. That's why he was a first-round pick. The NFL is very inconsistent with wide receiver evaluations sometimes, right? Like we talk about guys like Kevin White, for instance, out of West Virginia, where it's like, guy just didn't pan out. Why didn't he pan out? You know, and N'Keal Harry. Like there's been some wide receivers that are like height, weight, speed freaks that aren't necessarily great wide receivers. Quentin Johnston, I was not a huge fan of coming out of TCU because he fought the football tremendously in the air, did not extend, had really shoddy ball skills in my opinion overall. Kenny Pickett was the circumstance of Kenny Pickett was solid, nothing special, but he was in a really bad quarterback class. So he got bumped up tremendously, and it was a mistake. Everybody knew it was going to be a mistake, but
would you say that the Steelers were desperate because of Roethlisberger? Yes. And I mean, was that kind of part of it too? They had to take a quarterback, and he was the best in the class.
Their options outside of that were going to be Mitch Trubisky or Mason Rudolph. That was going to be their options. So they swung for a quarterback that they thought had the highest floor, I would say, with Kenny Pickett. And I think that's what Kenny is, man. Like my evaluation on Kenny Pickett was very good long-time starter that maybe could eventually develop into a low-end starter. That's what I see with Kenny Pickett. And I feel very good about that evaluation now 2 years into his career. He's not awful, but he's also not a starting quarterback in the NFL on a high-level team. Like, he's just not that guy, in my opinion. Najee Harris, is this the one that's asking me? I mean, I was okay with Najee Harris being a late first-round pick. I was okay with it. I think he's been pretty good on a bad Steelers offense. Like, I don't see any issue with that one personally. I probably would have drafted him more early 2 comparative to late first, but it's a late first-round pick. I mean, you're going to take a gamble on a kid like that, right? And I mean, he was 6'2", 225, 230, could catch the football pretty well. I had no issue with Najee Harris. Jameson Williams was an interesting one because the main pushback on Jameson Williams was coming off the injury, and he was a 1-year wonder, only 1 year of production. That was like the big thing against Jameson. But Jameson, again, why was he a first-round pick? Kid could fly, right? He could run for days. Why was Henry Ruggs a first-round pick, right? Why was Jalen Reagor a first-round pick? It's because they can run, and the NFL values speed. Jameson Williams, I feel like if he wasn't coming off an injury, would be a lot better than he is right now for Detroit, but he's a bust because he was coming off that injury, and he's a 1-year wonder at this point. He's not a guy that can be depended upon, and so that's why Jameson didn't end up panning out so far, but there's still time for him. He's only in his second year. We'll see what happens.
I was going to ask you about him, Ryan, because I know the injury thing and the lack of experience. You almost kind of thought maybe the development would be slower. Are you willing to be patient enough with him? Because if you think about the Lions, they have him. I meant more of the Lions. If you still have him for 3 more years, or the potential to have him for 3 more years if you want it, you know, and so he still has a couple years to prove himself.
Yeah, and he's got time.
Yeah, but there was some risk there. There was no doubt. The difference between the reason I would have been more patient with. I would have had no problem with taking Jameson Williams, although I thought it was too high, but understood it. But why I thought the Henry Ruggs pick was a disaster is because Henry Ruggs was just fast. He wasn't actually, to me, a very good football player. He just was fast. Right. Where Jameson Williams you can see it in college. He's a good route runner. He can catch the ball and do damage after the catch. And You know, he has potential to be a good football player, where Henry Ruggs was just fast.
Yeah.
And so I would much be much more willing to be patient with him than I would of Henry Ruggs. And talk about a guy just throwing his life away, you know,
Yeah.
like Henry Ruggs, just ridiculous.
Yep. No doubt about
All right, let's get to some of Tommy Guns' questions here, because he brought a lot of them. We've put that's so mean. Here's a funny one.
Tommy says, which series of plays were worse? Notre Dame drop pick and 10 men on the field the last 2 plays against Ohio State, or Auburn muffed punt, lining up wrong out of the timeout, and 4th and 35 touchdown for Alabama.
I mean, it was worse for Auburn because the circumstances were just more dramatic to me. I mean, now that as far as just the worseness of, boy, that's just bad. To me, it's Auburn. I think which one was more impactful? It's Notre Dame. I mean, Auburn's like what was at stake for Auburn against Bama? You get a good rivalry win. You know, I mean, you're look at your season, you're still bowl eligible. You know, you can sell, hey, we battled Alabama tough a week after, you know, whatever. You're still going to a bowl game. For Notre Dame, you could argue it derailed the season. I mean, they were different. You could argue they were a different team. And I think that impact was worse, but the actual plays were worse for Auburn. Got some super chats down here. I want to get to some of those from you guys. Appreciate it. Let Manager 1. I know you'll have intel on this at some point, but any nuggets on younger players that have flashed in practice to be excited about? Well, I 2 guys that I was told from different sources. I was told Braylon James had a very strong finish to the season in practice, and that Tobias Merriweather was Notre Dame's best receiver in practice the last 4 weeks. So out of the, I think, first bye is what I was told. So now that didn't always manifest itself on the field, but when you look at the production he did have down the stretch, it was pretty good. But yeah, I was told both him and Braylon James had very strong finishes to the season in practice. I was told some things about Charles Jagasaw the last month where a little bit of a light went on, and he still has a lot to learn, but they really love the talent. They think he has a shot to be a really good player. I think at this point in time with him, the question is just about where does he play? Is he going to be a tackler or a guard? I think that's really the only question that people have about him right now. So those are just a couple little nuggets. I'll save the rest for talking to different. Those are guys that I've had multiple sources on, so that's why I feel better about saying those. But the rest of them will be more some nuggets for the message board here down the road. Next question is for Fighting Mike. Thank you for the super chat, Mike. Appreciate it very much. And I love that you have that avatar because my wife took that picture of Mitchell Evans that you have in your avatar. So that's actually really cool that you have that one. That was the BC game last year, and Angela took that photo. It's one of my favorite photos that she took, by the way. It's just really sharp. It's like right in front of her. It's a great photo. Did Michigan's interception to seal the game give you flashbacks of DJ Brown too? What will be your lasting memory of the 23 season, plus or minus? Well, I'll give you a couple pluses and then a couple minuses. The couple pluses was we finally saw the Notre Dame offense show that when it's run correctly can be dynamic. I mean, when this offense, I mean, let me just point this out. And this is what I say is let's have a fair conversation. So I'll give you plus and minuses on both sides of the ball, kind of both sides of the ball. The pluses and minuses on offense. Notre Dame won 9 games this year. Do you guys know the average margin of victory in those 9 games? It was 32.3. You had one game that was a 7-point win. The next closest win was USC at 28. Or no, NC State at 21. Excuse me, was your next closest victory in 9 wins. You're talking about Notre Dame being a team that showed it can be a big play offense this season, something it really hasn't been in a long time. So, you know, those are all good things when you have a team that can show that kind of potential. That's the plus. The other takeaway that I'm going to have from the season is there was a dramatic difference between good and bad. Now, here's why I think a lot of people are reacting to it so strongly this year. Notre Dame did nothing different against the good teams this year than they had in the past. Nothing different. They've always been this way against bad teams. And that's frustrating. It's very frustrating. They were that way under Tommy Rees. They were that way under Chip Long. They were that way under Mike Denbrock. They've always been a team that struggles against the better teams in the schedule. That's got to get better. The reason I'm a little bit more optimistic about it getting better than maybe some others are is because what we haven't seen in the past is them being that dominant against everybody else. That's different than what we've seen in the past, which is why if the bowl game just stays on the level of what they've done all season, you're going to have a team that sets a scoring record, points per game and total points, and you're going to have a chance to set your all-time record in yards per play. Yes, they need to do better in big games, but there's a much more dynamic foundation to build upon, especially, Ryan, when like what you and I were talking about last week, when so much of that excitement from a big play standpoint is actually younger guys that are coming back. And you just look at the potential athleticism they're going to have on this team. You're talking about a receiving core that's just going to be loaded next year. Potentially, depending on who comes back, a running back room that you said it earlier is just going to be sick next year. A tight end room where it's like they're going to have the deepest tight end room in college football next year. I mean, it's going to be fun to watch. And so there's some excitement there. Now you've got to answer the question of why can't you do that against the best teams in your schedule? Like, look, Notre Dame's not going to score 49 points a game against Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, Clemson, but you've got to get to like 27. Like if they just would have scored 20 points against Ohio State, they win, and so your defense also had some woes in a couple of those games too, but partly because your offense couldn't help you out. So they're gonna have to get better in those areas. But the plus is, man, when this offense was on, good Lord, it was explosive. And never scored over 40 points as many times as they did this year. I mean, guys, they've played much weaker schedules than they had this year in the past and didn't do what they're doing now. That's something to build upon. Defensively, the pluses are, man, they made a big jump. Big jump. My takeaway is just the ability to close in a couple situations. Just you couldn't close a couple drives off against Clemson when you needed to, and you couldn't close a couple drives off against Ohio State when you needed to. But overall, man, it was great to see the defense take such a big jump with also some really exciting young talent coming along.
Well, they are one of 3 teams in college football this year that were in top 10 in both scoring offense and scoring defense for the year.
Mm-hmm.
The other 2 were Georgia and was it Ohio State was the second one, I believe, if I remember correctly. Actually, no, I don't think it was Ohio. Was it Michigan? Was Michigan the second one? Could have been, maybe. I can't remember. But either way, Notre Dame took a step forward this year, in my opinion. Now, I think they left a little bit on not a little bit. I think they left some meat on the table there, right? Like, I do not think that they lived up to their expectation. Am I still optimistic for the future of Notre Dame football, though? Yeah, I am. Because I think that you look at this team and you say, over 39 points per game, 16 points let up defensively. There's a lot to work with there, man. There's a whole lot to work with. Just that you need to figure out road, what the issues are on the road going into true road games. You need to figure out how you're going to get over that hump against the better defenses on your schedule. If you can, Notre Dame can compete with anyone in college football. They really can. So my lasting memory of 2023 is it's better, but it's still not good enough. It's a lasting memory. And I think that's what it should be, right? Like, I think that is where you should be. So I'm interested to see what the next step is, but it's going to be fun to watch regardless. So hopefully it's fun in the positive way and not fun as in, wow, this is chaotic and weird, right? Like, I'd rather it be very positive. So we shall see.
One of the shows we're going to do this offseason, and I think we'll probably wait till after the bowl game, Ryan, is you and I are going to have a show of, did Notre Dame close the gap this year? If so, how and in what areas? And then what still remains? Because they did not close the gap all the way. Clearly, they went 9-3. But if the gap's here, did they close it at all? Are they making progress? Yes or no? I would argue yes, and I'll explain why. But also then we'll discuss what were some of the missed opportunities to close it even more. Because that's the thing, that if you could wrap it up into that, Notre Dame closed the gap this year. They missed opportunities to close it even more. That's my takeaway of the season. If I can only do one takeaway, it's that. And that's part of the excitement, but also the frustration. Like that, it's a weird place to be for Notre Dame fans right now, because part of it's like, man, I'm excited about the talent and then this and the that, and the other part is like, but why didn't but why? But the missed opportunities. Them, and I think that's the thing is like when Notre Dame fans watch the Ohio State game, it used to be we're like, yeah, they got way better players. Like when you watch Notre Dame against Alabama in 2020, you can almost accept the fact, you know what, it's a heck of a season to get to that point and lose that game, and they're just way better than you. When you watch Ohio State, you don't sit there and say like, man, boy, our kids battled hard. They just got better players than us. No, it's more like, how the heck did we lose to that team? We should have beat that team. Same with Louisville, same with Clemson. And that's also part of the frustration, but it's also evidence that they have closed the gap because you are able to toe-to-toe, man-to-man, athlete-to-athlete play with those teams. Now it's just about figuring out ways to beat those teams. It took Clemson a couple of years to figure that out. It took Georgia a couple of years to figure that out. Now Notre Dame's got to figure it out, and they've had a couple of years, and now it's time to turn the corner, and they'll get that opportunity next year.
Yes, sir. We had a super chat from Charlie Weiss's last spell. What's up, Charlie? Hi, IB. With Mike Elko to Texas A&M, so you get Notre Dame going after any of the Duke kids like Paul Menke.
You already addressed, yeah.
Yes, what you talked about. Or you expect him to follow Elko. Also, any words on interior defensive linemen?
So
well,
are you
Charlie, I mean, we talked about I actually looked at a little bit of like the Duke commits in the class yesterday, just in case, like that type of conversation. Paul Menke is the only one that I believe even had an offer from Notre Dame. So I don't necessarily think that there's any movement that's going to go there from the Duke class, right? Like I just don't, and no, they're not going to go after Paul Menke. That's just not a situation that's going to be on the table. I mean, what are we talking about with the interior defensive line? Are we talking about for 2024 with the Nandiak Boko situation not going through? I mean, are we saying this?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure 100%.
I don't think well, just answer it both ways. In 2024, I think Notre Dame is done recruiting interior defensive linemen. I think they'll probably reevaluate who doesn't sign in December and then see if there's anybody worth kind of going in after into February. But I think right now they're done.
I'm more interested, what the next step is for Charlie because you were willing to put an extra number into Nandiak Boko, obviously, on the interior defensive line. So does that mean you go to the portal for an interior defensive lineman? Does that mean that you save that offer for a 2025 or that commitment for a 2025 kid on the defensive line? I'm more interested to see what the next step is than whether, what the answer short term is from a recruiting perspective.
So Notre Dame right now has what? 4 defensive linemen committed, correct? Kind of.
Yeah. Yes.
With Hulack, if you count him. So you've got CJ May, Davion Dixon, Joseph Reif, correct?
Yep.
And then Dom Hulack's kind of a hybrid guy.
Yeah.
And from what I'm told, they're still going to take Chris Burgess. They're still going to take Damian Shanklin, and they would keep their options open for somebody else. That tells me that scholarship is going to be put more towards 2025, which means they could potentially take a portal guy this year if it's the right one-year guy. That's the way I look at it. So if you're taking a scholarship for 24 and putting it to 25, that means you can also use it for 24's roster, the portal, is see how that stuff works. Yep. So I think that they'll have their eyes open for the right portal guy. But look, they like Donovan Heinisch. I think Tyson Ford eventually be that guy. I think the Armel Mukam is a guy that has people very excited about what his future could be. Devin Houston's a guy that they're excited about what his future could be. If if a Chris Smith type of veteran comes along, I think you'd see Notre Dame look at that guy. Or if a stud like a Braden Fisk comes along and they lose one of, or if both of Riley Mills and Howard Cross, I think you can see him go that direction. But if here's the thing too that factors into this for the portal. Well, if Howard Cross and Riley Mills choose to come back, there's no need to go to the portal for interior guys. You have those two guys. You've had Rubio coming back, Jason Onye coming back. You have Donovan Heinisch coming back. You've got potentially Tyson Ford, potentially Armel Mukam, potentially Devin Houston, plus Sean Silviano, who to me is an early enrollee, is a kid who may have a shot to, play as a freshman if you need that bigger body type of guy for 5-10 snaps a game. So there's plenty of bodies there if the two veterans come back. And that's with a lot of this portal stuff, Ryan, is like, does Notre Dame go for a portal guy there? A safety? Well, I don't know. Is Xavier Watts coming back or not? Are they going to go for a portal defensive tackle? Well, is Howard Cross and Riley Mills coming back or not? I need to know those answers first before I can say who they're going to go, what they're going to go do in the portal. Sure. So, which is why I think Notre Dame staff is going to probably want to hear those answers as soon as possible. from those guys.
Yeah, and I imagine you will get those answers pretty quickly. Michael S. with a super chat. Did Sam Hartman play at Notre Dame help or hurt his pro status? I'd say it's neutral, Michael. Like, I don't think he hurt himself. I don't think he helped himself necessarily. I mean, look, the same concern, and this is what I talked about before the season, which is why I kind of pushed back on some people saying, like, could he be like a second round pick, like top 50 type of kid? And I'm just like, guys, like, him playing well at Notre Dame is not going to help his arm strength, right? Like, it's not going to help him being 6'1" even. Like, there's some deficiencies to Sam Hartman's game that I just think are always going to be there, right? Like, I think that's why he is most likely, at best, a really good backup in the NFL. That's most likely his scenario because he is 6'1" with a average to below average and for NFL standards arm strength, and he's a solid athlete for the NFL level from the quarterback position. There's a lot of Gardner Minshew in his game, right? Like, there's a whole lot. Could he end up being a Gardner Minshew? Maybe, possibly. Like a high-end backup, it's possible. But I don't think that anything this year made that less of an objective. Like, he is still a good player who does some good things at a relatively high, a good level. I mean, like, there's just nothing that stands out for me with Sam Hartman. So I don't think he moved himself up. Obviously, I don't think he necessarily moved himself down, though. I think he's going to be a late drafted player more than likely, probably 6th or 7th round. If not, he'll be a priority free agent, and I think he has a chance to stick. That's always been my thoughts on Sam Hartman. Michael S., do you think Golden stays? Al Golden.
I have no idea. I mean, I would lean towards no, but that's just more assuming that he's going to be a hot commodity. Like, I think NFL teams especially are going to look at, and Ryan, you know more about the NFL than I do. So if I'm off base here, correct me, please. I think about what he's done the last 2 years in Notre Dame, especially this year, with not a lot of day one, early day two talent. There's some. I mean, I think Benjamin Morrison could be that kind of guy. Foskey was that guy last year. You know, maybe Riley Mills has potential. I mean, I know you potential to maybe eventually develop into that guy, but he's not that right now. You know, Cam Hart, talent-wise, is that kind of guy, but you know, there may be some other things for the draft at the shoulder and different things, but you know, played like a great player. But it's mostly great try-hard guys. Howard Cross, Nana, Javante Jean-Baptiste. You know, Xavier Watts might be another guy that's a day two type of talent, but it's DJ Browns, it's Ramon Henderson's, it's JD Bertrand's, it's Maris Leofau's, it's Jack Kaiser's, it's the Howard Crosses, it's guys like that. He put an elite defense on the field without the talent that Georgia has had when they're putting elite defenses on the field in the past. And it's a lot with scheme and all these type of things. And he's got they were an elite pass defense this season. And we're pretty good pass defense. I mean, what did they finish last year? They were, I believe, a top 15 pass defense as far as yards and ratings last year. Let me just go look at that real quick, Ryan, because they ranked pretty high last year as well. They ranked 23rd last year in yards allowed. They ranked 23rd last year in yards allowed per attempt, and then they ranked 41st in ratings. They weren't quite as good last year, but made a huge jump this year. They're going to finish the season. They finished the regular season, right, ranked number 1 in college football in passer rating. They ranked number 2 in college football in lowest completion percentage. They ranked 4th in college football in fewest passing yards per attempt. They tied for number 1 in fewest passing yards, fewest passing touchdowns allowed, despite giving up or teams attempting 45 more passes against them than they attempted against Penn State, and 35 more passes against them than they attempted against Michigan. And they're going to finish the season number 1 in quarterback rating and number 3 in fewest yards allowed, despite playing Caleb Williams, despite the fact playing Ohio State, despite the fact they they played some. I mean, potentially the number 1 overall draft pick at quarterback they played this year and absolutely shut down. You know, they shut down C.J. Stroud last year. They shut down Drake May last year. Like, they've played some big time quarterbacks. If I'm an NFL team, I'm looking at what Al Golden's doing, saying that's impressive as far as being a defensive coordinator, and they're not going to give a crap that he doesn't recruit.
Sure,
like, they're not going to care one bit. I just have to think he could potentially be a hot commodity, especially when you consider the fact he does have that NFL background as a position coach.
it's possible. I mean, yeah, I think that he is Look, I think that for me, I mean, it always depends on what's open, right? I mean, jobs open up so quickly now, so there will definitely be opportunities that are on the table. But yeah, I think that he'll be appealing to some NFL teams. There's no doubt about it. I think that he kind of hits all avenues, right? Like he's been in several different positions on the college level, obviously a head coach, defensive coordinator now for the last 2 years, and done a really good job in that capacity, especially this year. He's also coach linebackers in the Super Bowl and made some linebackers into some pretty good players, man. I mean, you talk about what he did with Logan Wilson when he was in Cincinnati, what he did with Jermaine Pratt, like turned some guys into some pretty good football players on the NFL level. So I think it's possible. I lean towards him coming back though, as of right now. I mean, I'm just not hearing much smoke about his name as far as in those NFL circles yet, but also we're in the middle of an NFL season, right? Like things aren't going to ramp up until the end and then into the off season when we'll really start to hear his name a ton. So we shall see. But I mean, I personally hope he comes back. I do. I think that he's a really good defensive coach, and I think that he's been a really good defensive coordinator for Notre Dame, especially this year. Notre Dame was playing championship football on the defensive side of the ball this year, and that was, I mean,
Yes.
Al Golden obviously needs a big credit to that.
Yep.
We had a super chat from Trevor Rocket. Thank you so much, Trevor. Brian and Ryan, late to the chat. I liked what I saw from Ashton Craig at center the last 2 weeks. It's going to be crazy offseason going into the bowl game in the transfer portal. That is why IB is the place to be. We should patent that, man. That's good. Or
I
trademark that,
agree.
not patent it.
I
But yeah.
appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Trevor, you're awesome.
Got
Iden,
two for my guy. Got two in a row for my guy, Iden, Ryan.
Iden says, most important person player on Notre Dame's team staff besides Marcus Freeman and the seniors. Who do we look? Well, I guess we'll just answer that question first. Who's the most important person player on Notre Dame's team on the staff besides Marcus Freeman and the seniors?
And my answer is always going to be the same. It's the strength coach. And whether that's good or bad, it's still important. I mean, sometimes something being important is because you're not good at it. But it's Marcus Freeman, strength coach, quarterback. That's it. And that's the top three. It doesn't mean those are the only important positions, but that's my top three. For Notre Dame to be a championship team with Marcus Freeman as the head coach, they needed a great special teams coordinator, and they got to be really good at quarterback. That's important. And all the other stuff, yeah, you need a good defense, need good coordinators, need a good offensive line coach, and all that. But you can have all that, Ryan, and still not be good if you're not good at 2 and 3, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think strength coach would be my answer because I think that for me, Notre Dame is always going to play a brand of football where they are going to have to win in the trenches and they are going to have to out physical teams a lot of the instances, right? So you look at not only is that a philosophy and an approach to the game, it's also you need to be physical in order to play physical, right? Like you need to be strong, you need to have that that core strength and that physicality and all those types of things. So I would say the strength coach as well. Second part, who do we look to emerge this offseason that isn't Jeremiah Love? I mean, there's a lot of guys I'm interested to see emerge this offseason. I mean,
yeah.
right now, I mean, my biggest question mark is not biggest question mark, but one of my biggest question marks is who's the left tackle? I mean, you're going to lose a multi-year All-American that's probably going in the top 10 of the 2024 NFL draft. I mean, Joe Alt he's that guy, man. I mean, when we talk about this like 10 years from now, as far as like who are the best offensive linemen, Notre Dame has come out in the last 20 years. Joe Alt's going to be in that conversation. Like, there's no doubt about that. It's going to be like him, Quentin Nelson, and Ronnie Stanley. Like, that's going to be the group, right? So you need to find a left tackle to replace Joe Alt. And whether that is Tosh Baker, or whether that is Emil Wagner sliding over to left tackle, whether that's a young cat, I don't know who the answer is necessarily right now, but I really want to see a left tackle emerge this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good one because that's probably my biggest question mark about this team for next year is that the offensive line as a whole, but then I actually feel a little better about the line as a whole after the last couple games. If Blake Fisher does the right thing and comes back, I feel a lot better about it now, but still very, very shaky on the left tackle position. And if Blake Fisher leaves, I'm really shaky on the tackle positions just as a whole. And after that, I mean, you need some receivers to step up and be kind of the guys.
Yeah.
You're going to need some linebackers. Like to me, who do we need to emerge? Like young linebackers, big time. Another guy that I want to see emerge, Christian Gray. You've got a chance to step into that, earn that. You and Jaden Mickey are going to battle. I still pray, Coach Mickens, please, 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 please move Jaden Mickey into nickel to replace Thomas Harper and slide Christian Gray in the starting lineup as the field corner. Like that trio, that would perfectly fit Jaden Mickey's strengths, in my opinion. Like, does his body type and game not kind of remind you a little bit of Thomas Harper? You know, strong kid and same kind of similar size and all that. And and then you need some safety, the young safeties. I think this is a big offseason for Don Schuler and Ben Minnick, like really big offseason, because if they have good off seasons with Antonio Carter emerging, Ryan, all of a sudden I feel a lot better about safety next year, even if Xavier Watts leaves, meaning it's going to be a step down without Xavier Watts, but like you feel like there's some dudes there that you can still be good there, and but if Xavier Watts comes back and it's a great offseason of development for emergence for Don and Ben with Antonio, then all of a sudden you're gonna be even more athletic at safety next year than you were this year even. So there's a lot. They're going to need a strong offseason if they're going to be a playoff team next year, because there's a lot of talent, Ryan, but it's a lot of inexperienced talent. And that's what they're going to have to focus on. And then OC rumblings, the only rumblings are that Jared Parker is going to be the offensive coordinator next year. And that's just like, if we can just accept that for now. And what I mean for now is like, if that changes, I'll let you know. But from every person I've talked to for the last 3 weeks, whenever I bring up like, hey, this is the latest rumor, they just kind of laugh like, dude, I don't know where this stuff comes from. Cause I can promise you that's not something that we're worried about. Cause like, I'll say this, the Notre Dame offense is going to rank statistically in a far better position this year in year one of Jared Parker than it did last year in year one of Al Golden as the defensive coordinator. Far better. And we saw the jump they made. Can Jared Parker make a similar jump? I don't know. But I definitely believe he's, in Marcus Freeman's eyes, certainly done enough to warrant coming back and being the guy next year. And people ask, well, why doesn't he give him a vote of confidence? Why does he need to give him a vote of confidence? Like, because people on Twitter are emotionally feeling a certain way about it. Like, if Marcus Freeman had to make statements about his football team based on everything going on Twitter or X or whatever, that's all he would do. Somebody asked me, like, why don't you respond to certain things on Twitter? It's like, if I just responded to every emotional thing that I got on Twitter, I would literally have no time to do anything else. Yeah. If I had to respond to every emotional Notre Dame tweet on Twitter, I would have no time for eating, sleeping, spending time with my wife, writing articles, breaking down film, nothing. That's all I would do. I mean, Ryan, you know this. You can get into a time loop where it's like 5 hours go by and you're just constantly responding to craziness on Twitter. And he shouldn't have to do that. He's got way more important things to worry about.
No doubt about it. We had Iden again with another one. Thank you so much for the super chat. Taking away DJ Brown's dropped interception. A lot of talk about the dropped interception today. What play do you wish we could have back this season? Who are each of yours favorite Notre Dame player of all time? Just one, and why? Can I say for the play I want to take away, Brian, it was that slow developing run against Ohio State where they had just taken Aldrich out of the game after just absolutely gashing Ohio State. I truly believe that, yes, we can talk about the DJ Brown interception on that last drive, but if Notre Dame just fed Aldrich on that last offensive drive, I think the game's over, man. I just think it's over. Aldrich was just moving, man. It was over with.
You know, and they were leaning on Ohio State really hard at that point in time.
You know what you just saw against Stanford, where it was just like, dang, Aldrich's getting 8 to 10 plus a carry every single time. That's what that last Ohio State drive, last Notre Dame offensive drive against Ohio State was like, man. He was just going to keep gashing them. So I would have kept Aldrich in the game, and I would have rode him to a victory. That would have been my one play. Nope, sorry, Jeremiah. You're great, dude. Jadarian Price, you're great. But Aldrich is ending this game for us right now. He's ending the game for us.
Yeah, agree.
Oh, and favorite Notre Dame player of all time.
Yeah. I've said mine. I'm a tie. Tony Rice and Rocket Ismail are my tie for mine.
Man, favorite Notre Dame player of all time is actually pretty tough for me. I would say the guy that I loved a lot was Tom Zbikowski. He just played the game the right way, man. Like, again, yeah, there were some mistakes along the way and it wasn't perfect, but that dude put everything he had, and he was a leader. And it felt like every time Notre Dame needed a big play that year, it was Tom Zbikowski, man. Whether that was forcing a turnover on defense, whether that was a punt return, a big punt return in a big spot. I love Tommy Zib, man. He was a really good player.
Not surprised at all that that's your pick for that one. Knowing what I know about you and how you played football and all that kind of stuff, it would totally make sense that that's your guy.
He's the man. He's the man.
All right.
Brandon Plensner with a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. We had that. I accidentally went. I went away from that before we answered it. So give me a second,
Okay.
Brandon. I'm gonna find that one again, Ryan. Let's go ahead and answer
Yep.
this one. I
Okay.
don't know why I did that, but
Well, we had a question from Brian Reeds who says, "Is it realistic to have the thought process of Joe Alt, Audric Estime, Xavier Watts, and others wanting to come back and playing for a championship?"
it's realistic. I mean, we've seen it before. I mean, Manti Te'o and Tyler Eifert made that decision back in 2011. They both made the decision. I mean, Manti. I mean, I've heard people argue. I don't know if this is true, Ryan, but I've heard people argue that Manti probably gets drafted higher after 2011 than he would after 2012. I mean, Manti was incredibly productive, and then he wouldn't have had all the other stuff going on, that hurt his draft stock or whatever the case may be. But Tyler Eifert was coming off a year where he had over 60 catches, 800 yards. I mean, he's probably still a first-round pick, and after 2011, I have to go back and look and see what the class was. But he was great in 2011. But they had unfinished business, and they made the decision to come back and do that. And guess what? It worked. I mean, Notre Dame's not 12-0 if Tyler Eifert and Manti Te'o don't come back the next year. I mean, they're just not. So I mean, we've seen it before. Sometimes guys come back because they feel they just need a little bit more development. And like that was Ronnie Stanley. Ronnie Stanley, from what I was told at the time, was getting like late first round feedback from people like in the business. But he felt like, I'm not ready yet. And Coach Easton made look, I can make you even better. And he did. He came back and he went from, maybe potentially getting picked 25 to getting picked 6, right? Wasn't he 6th overall? Correct.
So.
And even if Laramie Tunsil doesn't get in trouble, he's not falling out of the top 10. Like he's still a top 10 pick in that draft class.
I heard that I heard a rumor that Ronnie Stanley sent him the gas mask that made him. I'm just kidding, obviously, but that'd be pretty funny if it was like an agent that just sent it to him and like incriminated him. It'd be pretty hilarious. But yeah. Brandon Plensner, here's the question. Is there legitimacy to Marcus Freeman giving Jared Parker more control over running the offense his way down the stretch? We seeing an offense resembling more of Jared Parker? Are we seeing an offense more resembling Jared Parker's vision?
Yeah, I believe so, Ryan. I'm still trying to get more confirmation of that. But I was told, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I was told that there were certain rumblings around that he had responsibly taken away from him at some point in time in the season. I don't know if that's true or not. But what I do feel pretty confident saying is that I wouldn't say that like control was taken away from other coaches, because I think Jared Parker very much values, any good offensive coordinator is going to value staff cohesiveness and everybody having input. You can't break down, an OC can't be the primary breakdown guy for third down offense, red zone offense, coming out offense. What are the looks? What are the fronts? You need other people to have a role saying, hey, let's go third down. Dealin, talk to me about what you've seen. What, and you got to trust that they're doing that. And then you do your own analysis as well. But like, you've got to trust that your guys are giving you good feedback, and you want them to be open to sharing ideas. And, 5 brains are better than 1. Look, I was an arrogant young coach. I always felt that I was the smartest guy in the room, and no one's shocked by that. But I also was brought up to believe, but that doesn't mean that you don't value the other brains in the room, right? It's part of the reason why I hired Ryan, is because I had a great deal of respect for his football knowledge, for his willingness to say, I don't agree with you. You know what I mean? And here's what I think. There's value in that. There's great value in that. But you also have to be in a situation where at the end of the day, Ryan, you were a football coach. I would hope that you valued the input from other coaches. But at the end of the day, this is my offense, and I'm going to be the one responsible if it works or doesn't work, right? So this is what we're doing, and this is what I want to do. And so do I think that it was more of they ran it the way he wanted it in a lot more areas? I believe that to be true. And that's why we saw the offense not just perform better, Ryan. Because again, you and I were very clear before the Wake game. Guys, I do not care about margin of victory. I do not care about scoring 40 points against two bad defenses. How you get to those points. And when I break down the film, there were things that were like, we didn't really see that before. That's different. That's unique. What we always ask, why can't they scheme guys why can't Notre Dame get guys wide open like every other team does? Well, guess what they had the last 2 weeks, Ryan? Guys coming wide open. Just like Tobias on a post route, Greathouse on an overcut, Faison on a deep route, Tobias on a post route yesterday that the ball didn't come to him. I mean, we saw 7 or 8 times the last 2 weeks where Notre Dame had just guys wide open for big plays. We never saw that. Why? Well, number one, Jaden Greathouse looks a lot faster when he's healthy, right? I mean, shocker. But it was also because they made changes and adaptations to what they do and how they attack the team. Now, maybe that was could have been a lot of things, but do I believe that part of it is Jared Parker taking control? I'll give you a little nugget. I talked to a guy who's been a great source of mine. He's actually a member of the board, and he's at practices, and he said that before the Wake game, he said they got on the off. I mean, there was a coach that just went off on the offensive line about how they need to be more physical and the mindset and all this other kind of stuff. And I said, who was it? It was Jared Parker, right? Like, that's taking control of, this is my offense and we're going to have this identity. And what did they do the last 2 games, Ryan? Much more physical, just coming out, punishing people. They played bad teams before, but you and I go back to listen to some of our shows in September. Like, yeah, they blocked well, but like, they weren't dominating the way that we want them to dominate. I remember we talked about the Tennessee State game. You and I were both like, I didn't like the performance against Tennessee State. They just were better than Tennessee State. I didn't like the performance against NC State. I thought Central Michigan was an improvement. Ohio State was an improvement. Then they went back again. So to see that physicality is like something changed. Something changed during the bye week. What was that? There's a lot of things that we hope to find out, some of which we won't, but it was different. There's no doubt that schematically, philosophically, what we saw the last 2 games was different than we saw the first 10. Now we got to see the unanswerable for right now is, will that also be true against Texas A&M next year? Will it be true against Florida State next year? Will it be true against Louisville next year? I don't know. I can't answer that. But I at least feel like if you can continue doing this, you got a chance to be really good against anybody you play next year with the talent you're going to have.
I agree. I mean, I think that for me, it's like, I'm hopeful, Brandon, right? To your question. Like, I hope that's the case. I have seen some improvement. I mean, I came out of the Wake Forest game and I'm like, guys, I don't care that they beat Wake Forest by 38 points. I care that what it looked like offensively after a couple of just kind of drives, right? And you started to get into that groove. I think it looked great. And outside of a couple turnovers against Stanford, again, the offense was moving, man. Like, it was moving. I mean, so yeah, I think that there are definitely things that are different. Ultimately, it will only matter if you can do it against the best teams on your schedule. That's the only way it will be. There'll always be a cap on your team if you are great against the bad, but then when you play against a good team, you shrivel up and you just kind of go to complacency and ball control and do that type of game, right? So I think that we saw good moments the last 2 games. I need to see against Texas A&M. I need to see against the best teams on the schedule next year. If they do, then we're heading in a great direction. I just think that there's a mindset that needs to be changed in those biggest games, and I don't have an answer to if that has changed yet. I do have an answer if things have changed. I do think some things have changed. Will it be against the teams that matter most?
Right.
That is a question I have no idea about that yet.
Because it's a lot easier to make those changes going into play Wake Forest, where like, if it doesn't work, we're still going to win, than it is to do it against Ohio State. It is. Now you just hope that because they did this, that all of a sudden hey, we're more confident now that we can do these things against those better teams. That's the hope.
Yep.
That's the hope.
We had another super chat. This one was from Joe Pachuta.
I'm sorry. I'm not. No, I'm not.
I didn't even see what it said yet. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not reading that. Sorry, y'all.
Well, thank you for the super chat, Joe. Sorry.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yep. Well, I'm not sorry. because
I didn't see what it
yeah,
said. So
you just go look at the question. You'll see what I'm talking
okay.
about. Here we go.
We had Coleman Smith who says, "Do you agree, even without Mitchell Evans, that the other three tight ends have shades of Kyle Rudolph, of shades of Rudolph? Wait,
Kyle Rudolph.
Kyle Rudolph. Yeah, but why
Basically,
are
he's
both the
comparing. So,
same?
like Eli
Okay.
Raridan compares to Eli. I don't know what Stace means. Brock
I know
Wright,
that's why I was
like
confused. I'm like, why is Stace in
Cooper
this question?
Flanagan. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Like maybe Stace reminds him of himself, but
Oh,
maybe he meant, I don't know, Trumbull. I'll bet you he meant Trumbull. I bet you he meant
okay.
Tommy Trumbull on that one. Then Brock Wright would be like Cooper Flanagan, right? Sure.
Some
I would
comparison. Yeah.
I would
I see
argue
it.
Eli Raridan's faster than Kyle Rudolph was, but body type very similar. Would you agree with that, Ryan? Like
Yeah.
definitely the closest we've seen to that kind of body type. Cooper Flanagan's much bigger than Brock. I don't think that comparison fits. I think the role that Cooper Flanagan had would be very similar, but I think Brock and Cooper are very different athletes. I think Brock was a 245-pound guy that ran a 4.6 flat, actually 4.59 at the pro day. Cooper's already 15 pounds bigger than Brock was as a senior. You know, he's a good
Cooper's huge,
inch
man.
taller. Yeah. And he's just a different type of athlete where Brock was more of a kind of a twitchy vertical guy. Cooper's more of a smooth, fluid, big guy. So that one, but the role that Cooper could play, certainly it'd be very similar to the one Brock would play if Brock stayed at Notre Dame. Or if Brock was like kind of the one or the two at Notre Dame. You know, good blocker, you know, can make plays in the pass game, but blocker first, pass catcher second. Certainly that fits. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you watched Kyle Rudolph as from an NFL draft standpoint and a Notre Dame fan. How would you compare him and Eli Raridan as players and body type and skill sets and all that?
I think body type's similar. I think that Raridan's a better straight line athlete than Kyle was. I think Kyle was a good straight line athlete, but he was just more of a he was going to win above the rim. He was going to win down the seam with length and just kind of his body type perspective and yeah, and a developing blocker. So yeah, I think that they're similar ish. What's funny is like body type, Cooper Flanagan kind of reminds me of like Cole Kmet a little bit, even though I think their games are pretty different. But like Cole Kmet had kind of that long and he was 260 pounds and just like didn't look like it was bad 260, it was just like a big 260 something pounds. And that's what
You think
Cooper is, man. Like,
Cooper? Okay, yeah.
yeah, Cooper's got a similar body type to Cole Kmet. Again, not the same type of game, but like body type wise, because
Yeah.
Cooper Flanagan's a 260 something pound guy where it's like he can still gain weight and it wouldn't hurt him. Like he could legitimately probably play 265, 270 at tight end and still be a good athlete for the position.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's got a very interesting body.
Yeah. Agree. I love the tight end room. And then when you do add Mitchell Evans to it, I mean, Mitchell's really good this year. I mean, really good before his injury.
He was.
And honestly, here's the blessing in disguise for me if I'm Mitchell Evans. Hopefully he comes back healthy next year. And I'm hoping that he got injured early enough in the season where he can come. I mean, he got injured before Eli Raridan got hurt last year, I believe. It's about the same time, close to the same time. I believe it's a little bit before. If he's back healthy next year, the good thing about all that depth is you don't have to play Mitchell as much. I mean, you can kind of, especially early in the season, like you can kind of bring him back slowly a little bit, Ryan. Like that's kind of what I mean, because you will have so many other guys. You just don't bring him back like, okay, 50 snaps like you did this year. And I think that'll help them, with that transition. But it's going to be very interesting to see kind of how that all plays out. Because they're loaded. They're absolutely loaded next year. Here's a question, Ryan, that I'm going to bring up for you because I know you're very familiar with this player. But Beefeater asked, "There's a Harvard D line in the portal named Thor Griffith. Is it too much to ask to get a guy named on the DL named Thor?" That's a funny comment. Yes, that'd be great. But Ryan, I know you're very familiar with Thor as a player. What would your thoughts be if Notre Dame were to target him in the portal? Because I know that, I mean, you and I have been talking about him for about a year.
Yeah, he's a guy that I think the NFL likes a good bit. Probably a late round draftable player. I mean, here's some intel for you guys. I know that Thor Griffith, if he chose to go into the 2024 NFL draft, would have had at least an East West Shrine Bowl invites for the NFL. So he's well liked in those circles. He is listed at 6'2", 320 pounds on Feldman's freak list this past year. He's actually been on Feldman's freak list the last 2 years, and he was number 3, I think, on the list this year. Young man runs a sub 5 in the 40. I think he's been timed at 4.95. He's over 500 pounds on the bench, over 700, I believe, in the squat. Just a workout warrior. He really is. So I've actually seen him in person. I was at the Harvard Princeton game this year as well. And I mean, the kid is just massively put together, man. He's a big, big, big dude. So if Notre Dame needs another defensive lineman to come in 2024 to play, would I be upset if they called Thor Griffith? Absolutely not. Actually, I would be very happy with them calling Thor Griffith. He's a really, really good football player. And also, depending on what you want to do with him defensively, because his body type says nose guard. I mean, he's 6'2", 320 pounds, but he is a really explosive athlete. Like, he's had some tackle for loss numbers at Harvard. He's had some sack numbers. He can move around the defensive line a little bit. I think he can play between a shade and a 3 in an even front. I really like him a lot. So, yeah,
could
man.
he bump out into like a 4-eye if they were playing like 3 down stuff, Ryan, or is he more of a pure guard over guard center guy?
I think he's more over.
I haven't seen him. I'm asking. Okay.
Yeah, he's not the longest guy of all time, so I wouldn't worry about him playing like a 4-4-eye with a little bit of length issues there. So like he's definitely more of a 3 shade nose type of kid, but I mean he's interchangeable, I think, to those 2 interior spots, and he's a really talented kid, and he's obviously graduated. And guys, if you want to talk about guys that are going to put up impressive offer lists as grad transfers, just wait until Thor Griffith gets a couple more days in the transfer portal, because he's going to have a lot of suitors. I know he already has a ton. I was told a couple teams that I know for a fact are going to offer him pretty soon here. I mean, there's a couple really nice interior players in general in the Ivy this year. There's also Joey Slackman from UPenn, who's another 6'4", 300-pound kid who's a first-team Ivy this past year, who I think could also play a rotational role for Notre Dame if they chose to go that route. But it'll depend on numbers, obviously.
Yeah. We had one from Tommy. Let's see here. Where was the one? Here's a question, Brian. And this was brought up yesterday on the chat, and I'm going to respond to a question from John Harvell about this on the board as well. But I wanted to get to in the mailbag today as well.
Tommy said, what's your thoughts on a faster tempo offense being able to create more explosive plays? How much, if any, does the pace of an offense increase the likelihood of more explosive plays?
Well, I mean, it does from the standpoint of just volume. I mean, if you and I generate explosive plays at the same rate per play, and you run 100 more plays than I run, I'm not great at math, Ryan, but you're going to have more explosive plays than I do. So yeah, I mean, there's merit to that, but I also think that you're also going to have, if you and I give up negatives at the same rate, you're going to have more negatives than I will if you run 100 more plays than I run. I've always felt this: if you're a tempo team, then you lean into it and you take the good and the bad, because there's pros and cons to any system. You have to weigh, okay, are the pros and the cons worth it? And can we recruit to that style? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself. But if you're a team that wants to go tempo, then go tempo. Just recruit to it. Which means what, Ryan? You need to figure out what your run game is going to be. Do I need big physical guys that are going to block in tight areas? Or do I need more athletic guys, depending on if we're going to be a heavy pin and pull team? Or, like Oklahoma used to get like those really physical kids because they would like do G-rap and tackle rap, but they weren't like a heavy pin and pull. They were kind of a between the tackles run game, pull and throw outside. I'm talking pre-Brent Venables, like with like Lincoln Riley and stuff, with Bedenbaugh as the line coach and things like that. And you say, okay, well, or Oregon back in the day was a little bit more of an athlete. They needed more athletes in the offensive line because Chip Kelly ran the heck out of outside zone and getting the ball outside. So, can I recruit to whatever my run style is? But then I need a lot of depth. I need a lot of running backs and a lot of receivers, because I can't put 90 plays a game on my receivers, where if I'm running more of a pro style, 65 plays a game, my starting receivers can play a much higher percentage of the snaps than they can if I'm going the other way. So there's certain things you got to do. Can you recruit to it? But I also believe that you can be a great offense that's not pushing the tempo, but you've got to be it's about efficiency and explosiveness, and you've got to be very precise. And there's merit to that. But Ryan and I agree on one thing for sure: whether you're a pro style guy that believes in it's okay to not go 100 miles an hour, or you're a tempo guy. Even tempo, it's the same thing for them. Some of the biggest mistakes tempo teams make is not being able to slow it down when you need to slow it down and run the clock. And teams that like to slow it down, the mistake they make is not being able to speed it up and mix up tempos when teams need when you need to mix it up. And I'm not talking 2-minute drill. And that's why I always talk. What's one of the things I love about Andy Ludwig? I've said this before. He does a really good job of mixing up the tempo within the game. So you always have to be able to change speeds, whether you're a team that goes fast and you need to slow it down, or you're a team that goes slow down and at times you need to kind of speed it up a little bit. You've got to be able to mix it up. But no matter what you're doing, you've got to be efficient and you've got to be explosive in what you do. And if so, to me, it's the percentage of your explosives per play, not volume of explosives. So that's the thing I would say is, does it increase the number of explosives you're going to make? Yes, it does, because you have more plays. Does it naturally mean that you're going to have more explosives per play? Not necessarily. No, I don't think it necessarily does.
Yeah. No, I heard it was Yursich who said this, who was the Penn State offensive coordinator that got fired. But in the offseason, they asked him about, what analytics you really dive into, like what stats mean most to you. And he said it was the points per drive and the points per play stuff was really what they take a look at, because that points to efficiency at the end of the day, right? I don't care about being a high octane, super fast offense. I care as a defensive player. I hated switching tempos as my thought process. I either wanted to have to think fast or I wanted to have to think slow, and then I would get into whatever my assignment was. I wanted to be comfortable. And I think that when you switch up tempo and you switch up pace, that hurts a defense a ton. So yes, I think that Notre Dame, when things are going well, might need to go into the pace a little bit, right? You need to feed into that a little bit more. When things aren't going well, then maybe let's slow things out. Let's reevaluate. Let's get going here, get back on track, and then you capture the momentum when you have the opportunities there. So yeah, I agree 100% in that regard. Right. Next question is from Irish Blooded. Do you think Sam Hartman should play the bowl to help him in the draft, or should Notre Dame let him know they want to start someone else for game time experience for next season?
I'm going to say this. I don't think it's either one of those things. I think it's who gives you the best chance to win the bowl game. Notre Dame in year 2 of Marcus Freeman needs to win the bowl game. They have to be a game better than they were a year ago. It may not seem like a lot to some people. What's the difference? Look, 10 wins versus 9 wins, perception-wise, matters. It just does. They need to win the game. If you truly believe Steve Angeli gives you the best chance to beat whoever you play in the bowl game, then play Steve Angeli. If you think Dylan Devison gives you the best chance to beat whoever you play in the bowl game, then play Dylan, play Kenny Minchie, play whoever. This staff believes that the guy that gives them the best chance to win the game is Sam Hartman. You can agree or disagree with that, but that's what they need to do. So if they truly believe that, then they need to, if he wants to play, then you play him. If Sam decides he doesn't want to play because he doesn't want to risk injury or whatever, that's his choice. But I still believe in 2023, for all my frustrations with Sam, I still believe there's not a doubt in my mind that Sam Hartman gives Notre Dame the best chance to beat whoever they're going to play in the bowl game. I flat out believe that. Now you've got a whole month to prepare to get him ready to go execute it at a high level. And I feel confident in that. He's going to read much better in the bowl game than he did against Stanford or Wake Forest, because he's going to have more reps, more time to prepare for it, more time in the film room. So absolutely, Ryan, if Sam Hartman wants to play in the bowl game, I'm starting him in the bowl game. Now, would I maybe have a plan for maybe? We've talked about that, but they've got to win this game. They've got to win this game. It's imperative that they win this game.
They do. I mean, you need to get to that 10th win. You need to kind of show improvements over last season, right? Going 9-4 in back-to-back years, there's no growth that happened there, even though it's and context is that this year's schedule was better than last year's, but still, you want to show improvement in the win column perspective. And for me, this this bowl prep is going to be about evaluation, right? I mean, if you feel like after these few days that someone else gives you a better chance to win over Sam Hartman, then fine. That's fine. If Sam chooses that he doesn't want to play in the bowl game because maybe he has an East-West Shrine invite in his back pocket and he doesn't want to hurt himself, it's fine. It's fine. I don't care what the end result is. I care what the process is. And the process has always stayed the same of competition, competition, competition. I don't want that to stop now. I want that to continue. And if Sam Hartman's the best player to play in the bowl game, he's the best player to play in the bowl game. And then offseason is about who's the next guy after Sam Hartman. That's the next step.
Yep. That's you nailed it though, Ryan. When is that? Off season.
Yeah.
Because it'd be I'll say this. I might think differently if we all knew who the next quarterback was going to be. Like if it was a no-brainer, look, the heir apparent's this guy. Okay, maybe we might have that conversation. But it's not. So you give a start to Steve Angeli, and there's a chance he may not be your starter next year. Then what did you gain from that? What if Kenny Minchie beats him out? What if CJ Carr beats him out? What if a portal guy comes and beats him out? So you lost a bowl game potentially for a guy that may not even be your starter next year. That's the other part of it too, right? Is because it's not a clear line of succession at quarterback for Notre Dame,
right?
Like it would have been like, let's hypothetically, let's say 2020 Bama's not in the playoff. Let's just say they're playing in the Sugar Bowl, not in the playoff. And Mac Jones is going to go pro. And you say, okay, do we move on from Mac Jones and play Bryce Young? That's a different conversation than because like if they didn't play in the playoff, it means they dropped a couple games they shouldn't have. Similar situation what Notre Dame's going through. You get the parallel. Do you say would I have had a conversation about maybe not playing him in the bowl game or maybe encouraging him to quote opt out so that I could get some experience for Bryce Young, who was clearly going to be my quarterback the next year? I'd be more open to that type of conversation than what is the current reality of Notre Dame, is we have no idea who their quarterback's going to be next year. Is it Minchie? Is it Carr? Is it Angeli? Is it a portal guy? We have no idea. That only enhances my desire to say, I don't care right now. What I care about right now is win the bowl game. Because here's the thing, Ryan, all the people that say bowl games don't matter will be the first ones in here bitching if Notre Dame loses it because they played a backup quarterback. Sure. First ones in here complaining about it if that's the case. They've got to win the bowl game. You need that momentum going in the offseason. You need the 10th win, 100%.
You do, 100%. I mean, yeah, I don't even remember what I was going to say, but yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
One for the Gipper super chat. Thank you so much, sir. The offense is breaking records in year one. I'm trying to understand what that says.
Year one, then they hope they make the year two jump like the defense did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you too worried about maybe replacing 10 starters on defense? I mean,
sure.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you replace 10 starters on either side of the football, that's going to be a situation where you're going to have some growing pains potentially. And I mean, you also have to evaluate the roster as far as is there a position where you're not okay with replacing a starter this offseason? I mean, that always happens, right? So, I mean, those concerns are always going to be there. One for the Gipper, though. I mean, but ultimately, you have a lot of talent coming in. And if the staff has done a good job of developing those kids on a day-to-day basis, right? If Max Bulla and Coach Mickens and Coach O'Leary and Coach Washington have done a great job of developing those guys on a day in and day out process, then you feel okay as far as maybe them retaining that knowledge and that information that they need to do in order to be successful. If not, you might see some growing pains, but at least they're going to be fast growing pains, right? You're going to have a lot of speed on the defense next year. There's no doubt about that.
I have a hard time seeing it being 10 starters, Ryan. I think at least one or two additional guys will come back along with Benjamin Morrison. Like, I think at least one of the defensive linemen will come back, if not two. Between Watts and the three linebackers, one's going to come back. I mean, so I get where you're coming from. But, yeah, that's always a concern. But that's also why you need the offense to make that year two jump. Because it can be a great asset to a young defense. Take the pressure off because we're out there scoring 42 a game, and yeah, but again, you've got to do it in the big games too. You can't ask the defense that's going to lose, even if they lose 7 starters. Like let's say Cross, Mills, Watts, and Morrison all come back. You're still losing 7 starters. That's a lot, and you can't ask them to go out there in game 1 and go win us a ball game. You know what I mean? Like, no, play your role, but we're going to help you out today because we're going to go out there and rip this defense up. You know what I mean? Like, it's got to be that. It's got to be that, in my opinion. Good question.
Michael S. says, Andy Ludwig in Utah had a down year. Did Notre Dame luck out on not getting him? No, guys. Stop that, man. No. I mean,
he played the whole year without a starting quarterback.
Yeah.
And at times was playing his third string quarterback.
Yes.
and played a very tough schedule. They played Florida, Baylor, UCLA, Oregon State on the road, USC on the road, won. They played Oregon, Washington, and Arizona. And yeah, I mean, they lost some games, but their offense wasn't great this year. But and it wasn't, they had a lot of injuries on offense this year. They had running backs out at times, they had receivers out at times, they had offensive linemen out at times. Like,
True,
it was just
true
one of those
freshman
years.
starting at left tackle, all
Yeah.
those. They
Yeah.
literally at a point, guys, they were like, you know what? Sione Vaki, who's one of the better nickel safeties in college football, they're like, you need to come play offense full time because we don't have answers here, right?
And he
So yeah,
averaged 7.6 yards a carry,
he's
Ryan, on
great.
42 carries, right? Like, Jaquindon Jackson missed time. Like,
Yep.
it was Bryson Barnes, who was their starter, he missed some time. It's like, it was just one of those weird years. And no, I mean, I think Andy Ludwig, that team had no business going 8-4. No business going 8-4 with all the losses they had. Not just the losses they had from this year's team, but the guys they lost from last year's team. The big time players they lost off of last year's team. So no, they did not luck out not getting him. Andy Ludwig didn't all of a sudden forget how to coach offense after doing it for 15, 20 years. I mean, he was the OC for Utah when they beat Alabama and went undefeated back in 08. Like, the guy knows how to call a game.
Was also the OC for Utah last year that averaged over 38 points a game as
And
well.
yes, correct.
Yeah.
The back-to-back Pac-12 champions. They were 36-1 the year before that with Cameron Rising at quarterback. So yeah, he would have been a really good hire for Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it.
Caleb Collins said thoughts on Jonathan Smith to Michigan State. I know we talked about this on the game day chat show, Brian, but I love the hire. I really do. I think that Michigan State right now, they don't need flash. They need substance, and they need a program builder and a guy that's okay with building from the ground floor in this situation and getting high school recruiting back to the forefront, not just getting guys from the portal every single year and trying to make it work on a year-to-year basis. And so I think Jonathan Smith, you're going to take your lumps early on at Michigan State, as he did his earliest part of his Oregon State tenure. But the second half of that tenure is when you're really going to see them take a nice step forward. So I love Jonathan Smith. I think that he is the program builder that Michigan State needs.
And Ryan, I expressed some concerns about when you bring a coach in outside of a region that is imperative that you recruit that region. But there are things that you can do to alleviate that. We saw Matt Rule do that. I was like, Matt Rule going to Baylor? Like, that doesn't – but what did he do? Didn't he add like 5 high school coaches to his staff? Like, some were assistants, some were analysts. He brought in people that knew the region. That's what you do. Find some guys with Midwest ties. Go hire some guys that have coached in the Big Ten. Go hire, find a guy, a couple of top high school coaches in Michigan to be on your recruiting staff or an analyst for you. There's lots of things you can do. But Ryan, you nailed it. Everything. It's not just about program developer, but my point was this on the other night, Ryan. Certain teams have to win a certain way. Like, I don't think Notre Dame can win being a throw it all over the field, air raid team because of who they are, the players they can recruit, and the geography of who they are. I mean, just playing in an hour away from a lake that's going to give you heavy winds and cold in November, things like that. So it's like, Michigan State needs to be a team that can run the football and play great defense. That's how Michigan State wins. Every team that we've ever seen that was good at Michigan State that I can remember, that's exactly what they were. They could run the football and play great defense. And their quarterback play was good, but like Connor Cook was a product of a great team more so than he made the team great, in my opinion. And that's what Michigan State has to be. And that's exactly who Jonathan Smith is. It's exactly who he is as a coach.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great hire as long as he's able to make the things that the staff hires needed to make that adjustment smoother. Like, he can't bring his whole Oregon State staff with him. You just can't. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to bring some, but if you can, but you're going to have to mix and match some different things. And I think if he does that, he's going to be very good. And he very much fits the Big Ten, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, other than geography, other than a geographical resume. his personality fits it extremely well.
He used one of those running backs to transfer over with him, though. But yeah,
No, I meant staff players. That's a different
I
deal.
know.
Yes.
Oh no,
yeah.
I was just having an additional conversation.
He's got some dudes there, but isn't that
Yeah.
kind of your point though, Ryan? Look at the talent he's accumulated at Oregon freaking State. You know what I mean? Like, he's a heck of a coach. Heck of a coach. Really like him a lot. Like him a lot. Here's another one from Caleb.
Caleb Collins says, if Malik Murphy entered the portal, would you look at him? For like a minute, probably, but then I wouldn't pursue it. So
I like Malik Murphy a lot, Caleb. We've been asked about Malik Murphy before. My issue is I don't think adding Malik Murphy necessarily moves the needle for you because you're still in the same boat. You're gonna have to develop him. He's gonna have to learn the offense. He doesn't have a lot of experience. He made 2 spot starts this year for Texas. Did some good things in those starts. I mean, they won both games. That's the key, right? But if Notre Dame's going to go to the portal for a starting quarterback, in my opinion, they need to go to the portal for a guy that has experience.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. He doesn't have the necessary experience. So, and if you're going to go with a young guy, go with Minchie or go with CJ Carr, who I also think are very talented quarterbacks. So that would be my stance. Ryan, you see it any different, or are we on the same page?
No, I need if you're going for the portal for a guy to potentially start, I want a guy with a lot more experience than Malik Murphy. And it's no shot at Malik Murphy, but you have young guys that you can develop and that you can groom to be that guy, right? Like, why not just roll with Kenny Minchie? Why not roll with CJ Carr as a true freshman if that was your stance on it, right? So yeah, I want experience if I'm going to the portal for a guy that's going to start next year. So we had another question from Riley Bly, who says, does Audric Estime play in the bowl game to get a single season rushing record, regardless if he decides to stay or go pro?
I doubt that Audric would make a decision. I mean, look, if he's going to go pro, if he's going to play in the game, I think it's first and foremost, we have unfinished business. Now, if a byproduct of that is breaking the record, sure. But I could see him playing in the bowl game, even if he's going to go pro. But I don't think the only reason would be to get the record, honestly, because if he does, then he won't be locked in the way he needs to be locked in. It's about, let's go out in there and win this football game. Because it's like, so are you going to be a cancer on the sideline if the game plan requires us to throw the ball more and you can't get that? You know, like, I think Audric would come back because he feels him and this team have unfinished business. That's what I think it would be. And then hopefully a byproduct of that, depending on who you play, is he can set the record, but he'd need a big game to set the record.
Right.
He would.
Well, I mean, guys, I feel like I'm very like player oriented as far as like pro player here. Audric doesn't need to play, man. I know it'd be cool if he broke the record and everything, but like, you don't need to play 7. Like, you don't need to play, man. I'm sorry. And especially if you're going pro, like you just don't need to play in this game. It's just not.
I have 2 thoughts on it. Number one is just my personal feeling. I hate that. I hate that you said that. And I hate that that's the reality. I do. I hate it, but it is the reality. It is the new normal, and I don't like it. But at the same time, like you said, that's the decisions the kids are making that's for their future. I'm just a believer that just if the world was how I wanted the world to be, you started this thing, you see it through. You play the bowl game, it's part of your season. You see it through. But that's not the reality of where we are. And like you said, Ryan, there's nothing more that Audric Estime can prove by playing in a bowl game. If he wants to break the record, great. I mean, I think he'd need like 130 something yards. And so to me, it'd be one thing. I'll say this, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. If he was like 30 or 40 yards away, then I could see a scenario in which Notre Dame decides to bring him back and say, hey, we're going to go out there, we're going to run our offense, and the minute you break the record, we're going to pull you out. But, actually he doesn't need as much as I thought, but he's still 96 yards away. And he's gotten less than 96 yards in more games this year than he has rushed for over 96 yards. I mean, he's He's gotten that 5 times, and he hasn't gotten that 7 times. Now, a couple times he was close. He had 2 95-yard games and an 87 and 81, but it's not a given he's going to get that. So do you really want to risk getting your knee blown out or ankle busted up to break a record? He's already set one record. He set the all-time touchdowns record. I care a lot more about that than yards. I know yards is the sexy number we look at, but do you care that a guy rushed for more yards or the guy scored more touchdowns? Right. That's what I care about. So, yep.
Quinn Kibler, what's up, Quinn? Was Stanford's offense the most gimmicky we saw all year? I thought so. Gimmicky. I wouldn't call it gimmicky, well, Quinn.
I would say Wake Forest was more gimmicky than Stanford was. I would say I would agree with that. Slightly more, yeah. I mean, when you think about some things that they did.
Yeah. I didn't think Stanford was like overly gimmicky. I just think that Stanford is just a little bit like exotic with some things they do, and they just have a lot of diversity to what they do. I mean, like Wake Forest was running like, reverse passes and like trying to throw screen passes and like do all that type of stuff. Like I didn't find Stanford gimmicky. I just think that they are. That's how their offense is. I mean, that's how Troy Taylor runs his offense, though. In general, like they are very. We're going to out leverage you. We're going to give you a lot of different looks, and we're going to be okay with hitting the corner. We're going to be okay with running counters and, a lot of counters in the run game and the pass game. So I actually didn't find it gimmicky at all. I think it's creative is how I would.
Well, and the other thing too, Ryan, is, Bryce Farrell on the year has 21 carries. Tiger Bachmeier has 2 carries. Those are both, Benjamin Urasek had 11 rushes as a tight end. Now, I think the Sam Roush jet sweep was dumb because he's not Benjamin Urasek. But that's right there. That's 32. That's 34 carries to receivers and tight ends. So, like, when they run that jet look, that's just part of like, to your point, that when they run that jet reverse and then the fake off, that's just kind of what they do. Is it gimmicky? Yeah, it's gimmicky, but I think Wake Forest did more stuff that in the way that I take it, Wake Forest did more stuff that was out of their character than what Stanford did in that game, in my opinion. And Central Michigan, I'd have to go back and remember that game. I kind of remember I thought Central Michigan tried to do some stuff like that, but I'd have to go back and look at it.
We had Irish Blooded. What's up? With the regular season completed, what do you think the offensive identity aimed at was, and do you think they achieved it?
If you look at it the season as a whole, no, they did not. They did not achieve their identity because they were so different in certain games compared to other games. And to me, Ryan, when you have an identity, everything that you do in a game plan is going to be kind of built around that identity. Now the plays are going to be different and the looks will be different and no personnel will be different, but like, this is who we are and this is how we go at you. And if you watch Georgia against Ohio State, they did a lot of different things than what they did against TCU, formationally, motions, get certain players in matchups, but the identity of who they are was the same. And to me, this Notre Dame team changed. I will say this. I feel after the last 2 weeks, we are much closer to Notre Dame looking like what I think the identity that Jared Parker wants is. But until we see them go do that in the better teams in the schedule, I can't say that that's their identity, because if you have an identity, that's who you are all the time. It's not your identity against teams that suck, but it isn't. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense, Ryan? Like, I feel like we have a better idea of what the identity is supposed to look like now. But until I see them kind of do that consistently week after week after week, no, I don't think they found their identity. I think they finally showed what they wanted to be, but I need to see you do that against Texas A&M and Florida State and teams like that before I'm ready to say you've achieved your identity.
Well, I think identity is created over time. So my answer is no. I don't think that I understand 100% what their identity was, because I thought I saw like a 4-game stretch begin the year where I'm like, okay, I think I understand what they are. And then we got another stretch where I was like, that was completely different than what I thought you were trying to be. And then we've seen another 2 games where I think that the offensive identity has been a little bit different as well. So I think that it's still a staff that's trying to figure it out 100%. So I think that identity will hopefully be achieved early on next season, as far as because I mean, I really think that there was like 3 different identities this year. Like I really truly believe that. So no, I don't think that identity has been achieved. And I think that in order for an identity to be achieved, it has to be over X amount of time against every type of opponent that you're going to play. So I don't think an identity has been achieved. No, I wouldn't say so. Right. Irish blooded. Without saying who, do you think the pick of bowl opponents realistically changes who, if any, players opt out of the bowl if LSU is the opponent?
Oh, I think it'd be foolish to say that it won't factor into the players' minds. Now, will it ultimately change decisions? I don't know the answer to that. But do I think the thought process for Audric Estime and Joe Alt and Cam Hart and other guys that may consider playing or not, do I think that they do a double take or a second thought if Brian Kelly's the head coach of the team that they're going to play? Absolutely, it's going to impact their decision. Does it ultimately change their decision? I think it only does, Ryan, if they were kind of like on the fence 50-50, not sure. Like if Joe Alt, for example, and I hope Joe Alt plays in the bowl game, but I'm just going to use him as an example because he's the most obvious first-round pick. If Joe Alt decides tomorrow with his dad and his agent and stuff like that, hey, I'm not playing in the bowl game, and just it's a done deal, I'm not playing. And then it's announced next week that they're playing LSU. He's like, I'm back in, baby. I don't think that happens. If Joe Alt's back and forth and can't decide if he does or doesn't want to play, could playing LSU be the thing that leads him to that? Yes, it could. Now, my hope is that the precedent that has been started in the past with Ronnie Stanley, with Zach Martin playing in a bowl game, that was a little bit before that happened, but Ronnie Stanley played in an era, at the very beginning of guys opting out. Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey absolutely played in the era of guys starting to opt out, and they still played. And Mike McGlinchey played with injuries. A little different 2020 because Liam Eichenberg and those guys, of course, they were going to play in the bowl game. It's a freaking playoff game. But offensive linemen have kind of established they're going to play. So I'd like to see Joe Alt play. But if he has decided he's not going to play, playing LSU doesn't change that. If Audric Estime decides I'm not playing in the bowl game, playing LSU is not going to make him jump back in. I think it impacts it if they're just, I'm not sure what I want to do. And then like, okay, yeah, I want to play that team. And it's not just LSU. Like, let's just say hypothetically they got Bama. I think that would make some guys rethink like, I'm going to play against Bama if they're close.
Right.
But I think LSU could certainly be a needle mover if a guy is back and forth on what he wants to do.
Yeah, I think it could definitely change things depending. I mean, the good thing about Notre Dame is that like there's not a ton of guys that I think are opt-out candidates overall,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's like Joe Alt, maybe, Audric Estime, maybe, Sam Hartman, maybe Cam Hart. I mean, otherwise, is there anybody
Cam
else that you
Hart to
go
me,
yeah.
no. I mean, Riley Mills and Howard Cross are going to play. I mean, the JD Bertrand's not going to. The guy that I would understand how I feel about it, right? So let's say you and I both adopt my opinion on sitting out against it. The one guy that I would make an exception for is Cam Hart.
Yeah.
Because of his injury history. Like, Cam, listen, we got to have a conversation. Like, look, dude, you got through this year healthy. Do we really want to take a chance of something happening? Because partly because the way Cam plays, he's so physical and he's going to hit and he's going to come downhill. Do you really want to take a chance of you getting injured again? That's the only one that even in my stance, Ryan, if you and I adopt for this conversation, my stance on guys sitting out, that's the one guy more than any other that I would be like, hey, man, we need to think this because he does have a proven injury history. Joe Alt doesn't. Audric Estime doesn't. Sam Hartman doesn't. So that would be one that to me would actually make the most sense. But I also, knowing Cam, could see him basically being like, I want to play. And then the adults in the room got to be like, okay, let's talk. Let's talk through this, Cam. Let's really, you know what I mean? But I think most of these guys' instincts are going to be, I want to play. And then you sit down with the people you trust, and then you take their guidance. But I think most of these kids are going to want to play. Doesn't mean they're going to choose to play. I just think that's their instinct. Like Sam Hartman saying, I got 2 more games left after Wake. I think in his mind, he absolutely thought about playing the bowl game. Now, does that mean that when he sits down with his agent and his family that they may decide to do something different? That could be true. But I think his gut reaction was like, of course I'm playing. Does that make sense, Ryan? Like you get like me. I think that happens more than people think.
I'd be surprised if Sam Hartman didn't play in the bowl game. Yeah. I'll just leave it at that.
I would too. But my point was simply that I think he wants to play. I think most of these kids want to play. It's just the people that they trust convince them that it's best not to.
Right.
And that's what it boils down to.
All right. Next question. Another one from Irish Blooded. What does it matter what the offense is ranked or records it breaks if it isn't beating the best opponents on the schedule?
Because it shows progress. Because Notre Dame hasn't been beating the best opponents on the schedule for years, right? It shows progress. At the end of the day, we have said this a million times. You get judged by what you did against Ohio State and Clemson and Louisville, teams like that, flat out. But here's the thing, and here's the reason it matters and why it's relevant to this conversation, because you all just want to fire a guy because he lost those 3 games. And maybe at the end of the day, someday that is enough of a reason to fire a certain coach. But my point is, do you really want to good luck hiring a coach next year who's going to say, I got to come in and I could set all these records, but if we lose these 2 games because of me, you're going to fire me? Like, really? Like, you guys don't understand how that impacts coaching. It coaching decisions. It absolutely does. My point is simply to say we can all acknowledge the fact that what they did in the biggest games isn't good enough. You know who else acknowledged that fact today, Ryan? Marcus Freeman. Do you know who else wholeheartedly believes that? I can assure you with 100% certainty that Jared Parker, if he is anything worth anything as a coach and didn't get to a place where he could be at Notre Dame because he's perfectly content with just mediocrity, I'm just glad I have a job. No. He's not happy about it either. They're aware of that. But you also shouldn't ignore the fact that, guys, this team did things that we've never seen a Notre Dame team do in our lifetime. Was it good enough? No. I don't think anyone in this chat believes it was good enough. But to just ignore it, like if they went 9-3, Ryan, and they beat NC State 24-21 and beat Wake Forest 31-10 and beat Stanford 34-16 and beat Navy, 34-7. I'm not having the same feeling about the offense right now because I'm like, you're just as bad as you've always been, But the fact is in one area, things didn't get better. They didn't. Now, actually, the points per game against those teams is actually better than offensively than what we've seen in past years in those big games. But I don't care if it was better. It wasn't good enough. They scored more points against Ohio State this year than they did last year. Don't care because they lost both times. But you also can't ignore the fact that, guys, there's a lot of games where this offense is like, if you could do that there, then now we're cooking. And so, yes, that matters. That absolutely matters. But if you kind of were just the same team you've always been and there was no improvement, no growth, no change, that's going to give you a much different perception on whether or not a guy is taking things in the right direction in his first year, right? So Jared Parker lost big games. Name me an offensive coordinator at Notre Dame that didn't oversee offenses that lost all the biggest games against the best opponents and didn't score. When was the last time that was true? When Lou Holtz was calling plays, maybe? That's always been true. So did he improve in other areas to where hopefully they can do enough to change those things next year? In a lot of ways, I think so. In some ways, I still have questions. I still have doubts, and everyone should. But in other ways, I'm like, guys, you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that, and that.
Right.
You just can't, in my opinion.
Yep. It's about progress. So now the next step is you've now answered the call of beating the lower tier teams on your schedule by a lot, dominating them. Now the next question is, can you do it against the big competition? And if we're sitting here this time next year and the answer has been still been no, then eyebrows have to raise much higher, as far as like, I don't know if this is right, man. I don't know if this is the right direction you're going to go into.
Absolutely. Last year, Ryan, they beat Cal, who sucked, by a touchdown. They beat BYU, who was mediocre, by 8. Stanford went 3-9 last year. They lost by 2. They beat UNLV by 23. That means Notre Dame beat USC this year and by more than they beat UNLV last year. They beat Syracuse by 17. They beat Clemson by 21. They had 2 non-offensive touchdowns. They beat Navy by 3. They had one game like this last year, Boston College by 44. One game like this year. This year, they're playing those same equivalent of those teams and they're blowing them out. That's progress. Is it good enough? No. No one's arguing it's good enough. I'm simply trying to get you guys to understand, but you also need to be able to recognize that there is progress being made. And to Ryan's point, if the same things are happening next year and in 2025, then guess what? It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, you're evaluated on what you do in the biggest moments when you're at Notre Dame. Simple as that. Like, you know why a lot of people don't ever talk about the fact that Lou Holtz had some terrible losses during his career, like losing to 5-6 Stanford in 1991? Do you know why? Because he won almost every big game he ever played.
Right.
I mean, that judged on. Like, how many people talk about the fact that Eric Parsegian got dominated by USC? They don't talk about it. Why? Because he still won championships. He won all the other big games. And then when he needed to in championship years, they were able to beat USC enough to go out and win championships because you're evaluated on what you do in the biggest moments.
We had Nicholas Grosh who said the chat during the Stanford game was great. To hear you are just average fans with no real football knowledge.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. That was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
All right, we got Pete Weber. What's up, Pete? What would you guys personally do if you were the head coach to try and fix the slow starts on the road? Do you feel like it's more motivational, pregame type improvements, or more schematic elements?
Honestly, Ryan, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I think it has more to do with your preparation. I don't really think it's schematic. I think it's more about preparation. I think it's more about mental focus. I don't when I go back and break down the games like Duke, for example, Notre Dame actually came out against Duke very aggressive. I mean, they took 2 deep shots on the first drive of the game, right? They took the shot up the seam to Mitchell Evans. They threw the post route to Tobias that was just off by a hair. But it was the execution wasn't good. Well, I think execution comes down to preparation. So there's some kind of disconnect between what they do preparation wise, but then also with the travel and the focus and being locked in on the road in the hotel, pregame being in an uncomfortable environment. There's things along those lines that there's something happening there. I don't quite know what it is that's causing them to just not be as fired up and as focused to execute at a high level on the road. I don't know. And at first, I mean, we talked last week, Ryan, is it just good defenses or is it road? And we thought Stanford would kind of answer that question for us because the 3 true road games they played were all against teams that were pretty good on defense, Louisville, Duke, and Clemson. Well, we got our answer because they came out, and I would argue this was the sloppiest performance they had on the road was this game with all the turnovers and just blown coverages and things like that. Like, could you imagine what the Louisville game would have looked like or the Duke game would have looked like if Notre Dame would have come out in the first half in those games and played like they did against Stanford? Like with all the turnovers, it got ugly. So it's a road thing. Yes, there are good defense issues that need to be, but there's also a road issue that needs to get addressed, and they've got to figure out what that is. Because if you look at you go back to their last couple road games the year before, blew a big lead against Navy and got beat by USC. So it's a pattern that even kind of goes into a little bit into last year. In my opinion. So they started off well, right? Yeah. I mean, North Carolina win and Syracuse win, but there's an issue there. So I think it's a preparation thing, Ryan. I don't think that it's a motivation or a scheme thing, in my view.
It's got to be a preparation issue because, I mean, to your point, like the Stanford game, our most recent evidence, it wasn't a scheme issue because I actually liked a lot of what they did on the offensive side of the football when they got into their, to the crux of the game. And then defensively, they've been good all year. So whatever reason, I wish I had a better answer for you, Pete, because I mean, this is an answer that I think really needs more of like, what are they doing on the road in preparation, right? Like, what does the travel schedule look like? What are they doing the night before a football game? What are they doing kind of leading up to pregame and doing all that type of stuff? But my immediate impulse, yes, is that it is a preparation issue. It has to be. For whatever reason, there is bad turnovers, slow starts. That has to be a preparation issue. There has to be. So I think that that's the most reasonable explanation. And I'm a big person of like the most reasonable thing is usually the right thing, right? So I think that that is definitely where I would lean to, but I would be really wish I could just be like a fly on the wall of like what a game day or what a 2-day set going into a road game looks like for Notre Dame because there's something there. There's no doubt about that.
All right, here we go.
We have Shamrock Sean. Thank you so much for the question. Angeli looks viable for next season. The defensive line needs improvement. Who fills Cam Hart's shoes? Oh, there's a lot of questions here. Okay, so let's go. Angeli looks viable for next season is his first comments. We'll see.
I never put a lot of stock. Look, I liked what Steve Angeli did, but I just never put, and I've said this for years, I don't ever put a lot of stock on what a guy does when he comes in off the bench in the third, fourth quarter. There's no pressure. It's a different situation. It's a whole different pressure when it's every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You're the guy. The pressure's on you. You've got to answer all the questions. Did he show that he's got some physical tools that you like? Sure, he did. I mean, I'm not going to overreact to how well he played. I'm not going to overreact to the terrible interception he threw on Saturday. I'm not going to overreact to any of them. You know, he's a young kid. I think we need to hold off on just kind of handing him the starting job next year.
Yeah.
Cam Hart shoes, Ryan. I mean,
defensive line needs improvement was the next one.
D-line improvement. Yeah.
I mean, Viper needs improvement, like from a production perspective. But like, if I get the same interior defensive line play that I got this year, I'm pretty dang happy. If I got Javonte Jean-Baptiste-esque production at a big end spot, I'm pretty happy. I mean, so I think production from a full scope needs to be better. They need to be a little bit more disruptive, especially against the pass. But I'd say the Viper position is one for me, Shamrock Sean, that I would say like the Viper position has to be a lot better next year. There's no doubt.
If you look at the big end position, Ryan, the two big ends combined for 15 tackles for loss this season. It's really good. Like that's really good. And they combined for 7 sacks. That, like, if you put most of that into one player, you're feeling pretty good about that position. You go look at last year, and the big end produced 6.5. Let's see here, 6.5 tackles for loss, or 6.5 sacks, and let's see, 6. The top 2 guys, 9.5 tackles for loss. Like, big jump in production this year, in my opinion. Absolutely. So no, I would take that. I think the Viper position, to me, Ryan, has sort of, the lack of production there has soured some people on the view of the entire defensive line, when in reality, 3 of the 4 positions were really good. Really good. I mean, your backup, think about this, your backup D big end had almost identical stats to your starting big end last year. Nana had 5.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks. Riley Mills was a starter last year, had 6 tackles for loss and 3 sacks.
Yep.
That's your backup. That's very good production. Viper needs to get a lot better.
Yep. Who fills Cam Hart's shoes? Christian Gray seems like the most viable option, but we shall see what that competition
technically right now, the number 1 backup is Cam Hart. I mean, it's Jaden Mickey. But I don't think that necessarily is going to be true for next year. I think I'll say it again. I would love to see Jaden Mickey move inside to the nickel, replace Thomas Harper. He's to me could be quite good there. And then Christian Gray is going to be a star. I mean, I'll say this, Ryan. If Christian Gray would have played as much this year as Benjamin Morrison did last year, I think he would have had a very similar season. Like, I don't know about stats. And I mean, just as far as when we watch film, we're like, that kid's really freaking good. He's going to be a special player. It just, the thing is, there just wasn't the opportunity there because the 2 kids ahead of him are really freaking good. You know what I mean? So I'm not complaining that, the coaches should have played him more. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying the circumstance this year was different last year. Benjamin Morrison had to beat out Clarence Lewis last year, and he did. Christian Gray's not beat. I don't care who. You could take any freshman corner in the country, and they're not beating out Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison. It's not happening. Don't care who it is. And so I'm not saying he should have played more, but had he been forced to for whatever reason, I'm absolutely feel he would have been a freshman All-American at Notre Dame. No doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. So I think he's going to be special.
Transfer target needle mover for the transfer portal. I mean, way too early to know that.
Well, we'll discuss that at a different time. And if you want to ask specifically about a player, we'll talk about that player. And who will be the new OC? The new OC at Notre Dame in 2024 is going to be a guy named Jared Parker. So, yeah.
We had Bobby S. says, any young guys pop in mop-up duty? Any rumblings about young guys in practice?
We'll talk about the young guys in practice later, Ryan. But mop-up duty, I think we talked about this after the game. I thought Drake Bowen looked really good. like just athletically looked really good. And I thought Preston Zinter moved pretty well in those as well. He played in that game. A guy that's impressed me all season in mop-up duty has been a Don Schuler. I really like how he moves around. And then a guy we were just talking about, Christian Gray. I think those 4 guys, to me, more than any others, really stood out. You could maybe talk about Boubacar, and his limited snaps looked pretty impressive, but those guys played a little bit more. Drake, Christian, and Adon played a little bit more, and they all 3 really impressed me with what I saw of them moving around.
Drake Bone was the first one that popped, especially against Stanford, where you're just like, yep, that guy's going to be pretty good probably, just most likely. So, agreed. Oh, Devin Houston too. When you saw him pop a little bit, he looked
fake.
Pretty,
yeah.
Mark E. Stewart, what is your take on our offensive line coach? I think it's critical that we continue to develop top offensive linemen. Are we good here?
Look, I feel better about Joe Rudolph today than I did 2 weeks ago.
Sure.
And I understand the opponents weren't good, but like I said, it was how they played, not how they played as far as they dominated bad teams, but how they played together. They moved their feet better. They were using their hands better as a group. That was encouragement. It wasn't good enough. Like the rest of the offense, it just wasn't good enough. But to me, he's got enough of a track record at Wisconsin. We saw enough moments. Like, here's the thing. You talk about, guys got to step up in big games. I thought his offensive line played really well against Ohio State. I did. I thought the Notre Dame offensive line came to play in that game. Those are things I can point to and say, okay, let's build on that. Right. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what he's going to do in year 2. And even if I didn't, he would have had to be pretty bad for me to say, don't bring him back for year 2, because the idea of having a 4th O-line coach in 4 years is just no. No, that's tough, man. You need continuity. Continuity can't be an excuse for not making tough decisions, but it also can't be ignored. There's merit to continuity. There really is. Yeah. And he did enough for me recruiting-wise and coaching-wise, Ryan, to say, hey, let's see what this guy can do in year 2 when he gets a full off season with these kids.
Yeah. I think like most coaches, there was some good and there was some puzzling and some struggles, right, at times. I mean, I personally think, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I think Joe Alt took a nice step this year, as far as from a run game perspective. I thought Joe Alt was a much better run blocker in 2023 than he was in 2022. That shows that someone had to be working with him, right? Like somebody had to be working with him. I think he's still got some young guys ready to play when they finally got their call to play. So I think that there's been some positives. Was it good enough? Yes. No, it wasn't. It was not good enough. But I still think there are some positive signs in there of a year 2. I think that the offensive line is going to play at a much higher level as far as the players coming back regard to their personal expectations.
Yeah. I gotta laugh here. A guy in the chat right now is just going on an emotional tirade about the offensive coordinator. And I believe somebody asked him.
Is it TJ? Is it TJ?
Yeah. And I just put him on timeout.
I've been putting him in timeout. I probably put him in timeout like 15 times in the show. And I don't think he caught the joke there.
I think but somebody asked him, I believe, who he would like to see be the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I know. I saw.
And did you see his answer? Kevin Johns of Duke?
Johns, yeah.
What?
He wants Kevin Johns and Riley Leonard to come over, apparently.
What? Okay, Riley Leonard, sure. Kevin Johns, no. Like, good Lord.
Yeah, oh, I would have a much different list of offensive coordinator candidates.
Yes, and he would not be on it. Insured by Big, appreciate this. Not a question, but just wanted to say thanks for the season-long content. Not the season both programs wanted, but future's bright. Would be fun to play in a bowl, even though key players won't play. Insured by Big is an LSU fan who's been with us all year and has been a really good poster, so we appreciate you very, very much. One of the few LSU posters we didn't have to ban because he's a really good contributor to our board. So we really, really, really appreciate that, obviously.
All right. We got DJ Holman. DJ, I haven't seen you in a while, man. What's going on? A fun one. Who would be the 6 players in the current roster to be on your dodgeball team? Oh, man. I actually played on some dodgeball teams, man. I was a pretty good dodgeball player. So
you got to at least have one quarterback. I'm going Kenny Minchie because I need that guy that can, change arm angles, right? I need a quick guy. So like I'm probably putting Jordan Faison on my dodgeball team. You just talk about a guy that's a freaky. I mean, I just kind of feel like if I just want like these really freaky athletes on my team, I'm looking like, okay, Josh Burnham, and who's a former quarterback, and Drake Bowen, those guys got to be on my team as well. I mean, those are just some that kind of pop off the top of my head when I think about dodgeball teams, right? Because you don't want like Joe Alt, right? Because he's going to be an easy target. You don't like Blake Fisher because they're going to be easy targets. Riley Mills because they'll be easy targets. You want guys that have a little bit of athleticism to them. So,
yeah, no, I mean, you need a combination of arms and good athletes that are good dodgers, right? Like you need those types of guys. So, I mean, I would almost take the whole quarterback room. I mean, honestly, like I would take because we used to play 6 versus 6. So, give me Angeli, Hartman, and Minchie, and then.
The reason I would only take one of them because I look at some of the guys that are like maybe a little bit better athletes that have throwing, like Drake Bowen was a really good baseball player. We know he can throw, right? Josh Burnham was a former quarterback. He can throw a little bit more twitchy athletically. But no, I mean, if you're going to take quarterbacks, that makes sense, obviously, because what's one of the biggest important things of playing dodgeball? Throw the dodgeball. Got to throw the ball.
And then I would take former high school quarterbacks. You mentioned Jordan Faison would be one of them. I would take Drake Bowen because of his baseball background. Sure.
Joshua
Burnham, I guess, makes some sense, even though he's kind of a bigger guy. So I don't know if I would 100% want him.
But he's athletic.
Yeah. Sure. He's athletic.
Yeah. I'm trying. Who are some other quarterbacks? So that's the issue with Mitchell Evans, right? Is Mitchell Evans a former quarterback too, but he's a really big target.
He's also on crutches right now. So yeah.
If he was healthy, in our fantasy dodgeball league, we can magically Mr. Miyagi heal the knee. So yeah. Here's a question for you, Ryan. Adam Blair says, "Are we still recruiting that stud running back from Louisiana, James Simon?" I was just curious.
Yeah, no, Notre Dame's still recruiting him. I mean, they made a really nice impression on him when he made it up for his first visit to Notre Dame. I thought before that it was like, that's not going to happen, right? And you also have 2 running backs already committed in the 2025 class. So, Adam, there's some numbers questions that need to be answered ultimately, but Notre Dame is still recruiting James Simon. They still have contacts, so we'll see what happens with that one.
Another question here, Ryan. This one is Irish for Life is also a Indiana fan as well as a Notre Dame fan. He says, "Who would be a good coach for Indiana to hire?" Hold it. Got my like in. Holding as best as I can. God bless you at IB and you at IB and all IB Nation. So my guy Irish for Life is also going through some tough, some physical times, some health times right now. So we're definitely praying for you there, buddy. But who would be some good hires, Ryan? I haven't seen a lot of names mentioned, but one name that has been surprisingly absent from all those lists has been Dylan McCullough. It surprises me a little bit. But who would you look at and say would be guys that would be on your list if you're the AD?
No idea. I need to do a little bit more research on that one. I honestly don't even have.
What about a type? How about this, right? How about a type? Because like to me, with these type of jobs, I'm always like, go find some Group of 5 guy or some FES guy that's really creative and can put an offense on the field that can score. Because that's the only hope you have. Like a name that pops in my head. I don't know a lot about him as a coach, but like I look at what Tyson Helton has done at Western Kentucky, and he's that kind of air raid-ish type of offense that can go score some points. If you want to win at Indiana, you're not going to do it playing ground and pound and running the football and playing defense. You're going to have to score.
Yeah. Well, I think I would definitely target a younger coach, offensive minded, because I mean, I'm usually a big fan of if whatever didn't work the last time, let's do something a little bit differently. And Tom Allen was obviously a very respected and a good person, but he was an older coach and kind of had that old aura to him. So I think going a little bit younger and a little bit more enthusiastic, getting that offense going, because right now that offense is absolutely terrible. I actually think I think that you can turn around the Indiana defense pretty quickly as far as in that league, right? Like it's not like you're playing a bunch of great offenses in the Big Ten on a week-to-week on a year-to-year basis. I mean, I know USC and UCLA are coming in next year, right? So like it's a little bit different moving forward, but ultimately I think the defense could be a little bit easier of a turnaround. I think an offensive-minded young head coach would be where I would personally go.
So same page then, right? Because I was talking about like a Tyson Helton. I don't know his youth, but like a guy like that. So yeah,
something like that, yeah, energetic and all that good stuff.
I'll let you answer this one, Ryan. Will Rogers to Notre Dame, thoughts?
No. Answer's no. I don't really even want to put analysis to it, to be honest. And
It's just not a
it's not
fit, Ryan.
disrespectful.
He's not
Yeah.
talented, and it's not a fit.
Yeah. He's an air raid quarterback. You do
People
not
are,
run the
you know
air
what
raid.
it is? In fairness to fans, in fairness to them, you know, they haven't watched Mississippi State much. They just look at the
No.
numbers, and I get it. I do. I get it. I would just say, look at this year's numbers when he wasn't playing in an air raid, and that's more indicative of Will Rogers' talent level than what he did playing under Mike Leach.
If Notre Dame's going to go for a experienced quarterback that's going to come here and compete for a starting job, I want it to be a guy that has a get out of jail free card, whether that is a bazooka for an arm, whether that is a great athlete that can create some things outside of structure. I want a guy that has something to him as far as that. Will Rogers can be fine if everything's perfect, right? He can be fine, but don't ever be great for one if everything's perfect, and he'll never be great on his own at times. I want someone that when things break down or things aren't perfect, they can make the imperfect perfect at times. That's what I want. Get out of jail free card is a player that I want.
All right, here is one from A-Bent.
A-Bent says, is the current situation and vibe in the receiver room currently close to how dire it became after the 2021 season? It feels like it has been an issue for 8 years and new coaches can't change it.
It's not as dire, but it's getting there, which means there's going to need to be some changes to how the day-to-day is run. And so, yeah, it's getting there. It's getting there. And that's one of the risks you run when you hire a guy that's never coached football for very long, is you got to learn. You got to be able to teach it. You can know the guy. I mean, Chancey Stuckey absolutely knows the ins and outs of playing wide receiver. But can he relate to players in a way? And he's a very decent human being. He's a very good man. But can you connect with players and relate to players and teach players? That's a different story. And that's been a bit of an issue this season and last. In my
2021,
opinion.
you also had no numbers and you had no development at wide receiver.
Yeah.
So
well, the point is you lost numbers because a bunch of kids left because of the position coach. I think that's the concern. So that's what I say. It's not there yet. To your point, Ryan, it's not there yet. But if it doesn't get addressed in some way, shape, form, or fashion, it will get there. It will get there. All right. Some of these questions are kind of repeats of kind of what we've done in the past. Here's an interesting one.
Zach 32. Thank you, Zach. Since Jared Parker is staying, how much confidence do you have that the rest of the offensive staff will remain intact for next year? Without naming names, do you think there should be personal changes?
I'm not going to say whether I think there should be personnel changes. I'll say this. I don't expect – look, I highly doubt that the staff in its entirety of 10 assistants comes back as is. I think there'll be some changes, whether that means guys leave for jobs that they get, whether that means, you know, Marcus Freeman thinks that they can upgrade. I mean, look, I promise you, if Marcus Freeman feels he can upgrade a position, he'll strongly consider making that change. If Al Golden leaves, you know, I mean, there were several guys that Chris O'Leary got pursued by the NFL teams last year. I fully expect that to happen again. You know, because the one thing about Chris O'Leary is he's a pretty good position coach, you know, as far as teaching the position. And when you think about what he's working, he finally, Ryan, it's like in his 3 years, he finally gets a guy in the last 2 years that has like NFL physical talent, and that guy dominates, right? It's not a coincidence. I mean, part of that's on Xavier, but I think you got to give Chris O'Leary credit for that. They're not going to care that he doesn't recruit. Like, they do not care in the NFL. Will he be pursued again? I would imagine so. Will he leave? I have no idea. You know, our team's going to come after Mike Mickens? Yeah, they will. NFL teams, college teams are going to come after Mike Mickens. Will he leave? I don't know. There will be a lot of Notre Dame coaches that get pursued by people this year. Will they leave or not? I don't know the answer to that. Dylan McCullough has not hidden the fact he wants to be head coach. Will some team give him a chance to finally be that? I have no idea. I'd be really shocked if they don't have some departures from this current staff. I don't think it's going to be a ton, but I fully expect there to be some departures from the current staff.
And there usually is. I mean, what program just maintain coaches every single year? Like, that just doesn't.
Notre Dame pre-2016.
Right. Well, I mean, even like Clemson, who was like very good with keeping offensive and defensive coordinators there for a long time. It was like they're still losing position coaches, right? Like, they're still losing those types of guys. It's hard to just maintain a staff every single year, man. It's hard.
Yep, it is.
All right. Curtis Hewitt. Thank you, Curtis. It's been a long time since I was able to catch a live show. Happy you're here. If you could match up two former national championship teams from any school and era, which teams would you pick? That's
I think,
interesting.
Ryan, you and I believe, were asked this over the summer. And my answer of my era, I would have loved to have watched the 2019 LSU team offense against the 2001 Miami defense. Like, I would have loved to have watched that. So 1999 LSU against 2001 Miami. That would be a phenomenal game.
Those are probably the two
Phenomenal
best
game.
teams I've seen in my lifetime as well.
Yeah.
So that's probably, I mean,
Yeah.
not to be boring, but that would probably be I mean, I've never seen a roster as talent rich as what Miami had in 2001. Like literally, a team could have stolen their third stringers and probably competed for a conference championship or potentially national championship. Like it was dumb. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they had like their running back room was like the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. They had like Clinton Portis, Frank Gore, Willis McGahee, Jared Payton, Najee Davenport. It's like, dude, what are we doing here? Like, why is it that deep? Doesn't make any sense. So 2001 Miami would 100% be there, and I've never seen an offense like 2019 LSU. Just haven't seen it.
Ryan, and my answer to not response, because you're not disagreeing with me, but like that's part of the reason, because I haven't seen many secondaries like the Miami 2021 football team. Like that's what makes it like so would be so much fun to watch. You know, when you just look at how loaded that Miami team was in the secondary. I mean, Antrell Roll, Mike Rumpf, Kelly Jennings, Sean Taylor, Philip Buchanan. I mean, that team was absolutely loaded in the secondary. Like, now here's the thing. I'll say this: I would love to see that game played in 2001 rules, because otherwise you just take Sean Taylor out of the game because he'll get targeted. He'll get targeting in the first quarter, right? But 2001 rules, when football was football, that would be a phenomenal game, because of there aren't many receiving cores that you could look at, right, and say they could do damage against that secondary. That 2019 LSU receiving core could, because you can't stop all three of them. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, and then if you try to, okay, Thaddeus Moss is running seam routes. I mean, that those two teams are so talented, man.
Yeah.
Now, here's my thing. I'd probably pick Miami to win in a close game, because I think Miami's offense against that LSU defense, which was good but not great, would be able to do some work as well. Like, they were pretty good on offense as well back then, Ryan.
They were. I might pick the 2002 Ohio State Buckeyes. Not. Sorry, Archer.
That was a really good Buckeyes team, but no.
No, it was a great Buckeyes team, but yeah. I mean, they had to cheat to win that game, but otherwise. Tyler Evans with the super chat. What did you think of the Apple Cup and the Iron Bowl? The Apple Cup was a really competitive football game, man. I mean, Washington State, like, their passing game really kept them in that football game for a long time. Washington, it took them a while to, I mean, they really never even got clicking. It was just kind of a really blah game from Washington overall. It was a competitive game. I expected it to be a competitive game. I expected Washington to beat Washington State as well, which they ended up doing. I didn't think it was quite going to be as close as it was, but that's a game that, like, you know, rivalry games always happen like this, right? Like they always happen. That Auburn Alabama game, I watched some of the highlights because we were live when we were like that game was happening. Game was weird, man. That was a weird football game between Alabama and Auburn. I still don't know how Alabama won that game, but that's yeah.
Agree.
Aiden Benami, how has Billy Schroff looked so far? Am I crazy to think that Kedron Young might take the second, maybe third running back spot next year? Wouldn't be.
Well, let's just go there, right? Am I predicting it? No, because he's going to have to beat out some pretty good players. I'm definitely not predicting number 2, barring injury. But could he be number 3 and maybe beat out Jabron Payne? It's possible. It's really possible. He's a very talented running back.
We had Daniel Anderson on this podcast recently, and he talked a lot about how Dylan McCullough really specifies roles for players in a running back room and what their role is to this offense. I could 100% be, even if you don't want to dub him like running back 2 or running back 3 to your question, Aiden, like if Kedron Young is your short yardage goal line back as a freshman, would I be shocked? Absolutely not. I would not be shocked at all about that. I think he has the potential to have a role in year 1.
You're not redshirting him. There's no point in redshirting Kedron Young. None. Just like I said back in 2019, there was no point in redshirting Aeneas Williams. Or not Aeneas Williams, excuse me, Kyron Williams. Because my whole point was if a Kyron Williams is a good enough player to be a starter for you someday, he's not going to be a 5-year player. So you redshirted him and got 2 years out of him instead of 3. Yeah, if there was ever going to be a 5th-year running back, who would it have been, Ryan? Tony Jones Jr. And he left after his senior year, right? Like
He's a running back.
just
Yeah,
right. You're just not going to keep a running back for 5 years. So there's no point in redshirting him. So find a role for Key, even if it's only 25 carries a game. Just that kid needs to play because he's really freaking good.
If you have to keep a running back for 5 years too, he's probably not that good. Let's be honest about it.
The only way you keep a guy for 5 years is if he has an injury history, but he gets the red shirt anyway because of the injuries. Like that's you know what I mean? So he would have get that. There's no point in redshirting a running back, in my opinion, unless it's a kid, Ryan, that's like you took a flyer on a kid, you discussed during his recruitment. He's undersized. He's not physical. I mean, maybe in that weird scenario, but that's not the kind of guy that Notre Dame is going to get in most. That's the kind of guy that you get at like Bowling Green. And we love this kid, but he's 150 pounds. And so we need to get him a year in the weight room first because he might be a 5-year guy. That doesn't happen in Notre Dame. The kids that they're recruiting, like if you recruit a guy that you think is a 5-year player, probably you shouldn't be recruiting him at Notre Dame unless that's your goal. Hey, this is a depth player, a role player, a glue guy that is going to be perfectly fine being the number 3 running back for 5, maybe, but that ain't Kedron Young. That ain't Kedron Young.
Honestly, like Aeneas Williams is going to play on kick and punt coverage for me next year too. Like I'm not redshirting him either because that kid is a really good safety on the high school level too. Like he can run down and cover a kick, man, 100%.
And I'm letting him try out as my punt returner and kick returner. I'm letting him try out there too and see if he can beat guys out there. I mean, you're gonna have a lot of athletes on the offensive side of the ball next year, man. A lot of athletes. First part of the question: how did Billy Schrouth look so far? I mean, look, there were redshirt freshman issues with Billy in the last 2 games, right? I mean, a couple times taking bad angles with a football, a couple times being late with his hands, a couple times not moving his feet. There's stuff like that. Ashton had some of those. When Ashton got beat on Saturdays, because he would hit you and stop his feet, like that he'd get knocked back in pass pro because he'd stop his feet on contact. But then there are other times when he'd come out and move his feet and drive guys off the ball. So it's like cleaning up some of that technical stuff, assignment stuff. But physically, I thought they both looked great. I thought Billy looked really good. I mean, he gets up to the second level way faster than anybody they've had the last couple seasons, really. Pulls really well, and he's powerful. Like there's a couple times, like the other thing too, I was impressed by both him and Ashton is they understood more so than the previous guards. I got to get to this guy's outside shoulder. I've got to get to this guy's outside shoulder or inside shoulder if you're backside. And they would really work to get there. And Billy's so quick, Ryan, that he can engage you down the middle and then still work outside of you. And it was really impressive. So were there young guy mistakes? Were there mistakes that I would be more critical of him than I would, where I'd be more understanding of him than I would of Rocco or Blake Fisher or Joe Walt? I've been more critical of them if they'd have made similar mistakes. Yes, there are. Sure. But that's the reality when you're making start 2 compared to start 20 is, I'm still going to coach you up and correct those mistakes, but I'm not going to get as pissed about it if you're in start 2 compared to start 20. But man, I feel so much better about the interior line going into this offseason than I did 2 weeks ago because of those 2 kids.
I feel really great about Ashton Craig too. I mean, he
looked really good.
He does. Yeah.
He's Ryan, athlete. If you look at his body, he's going to get bigger and add a lot of strength. He's still got some of that young country boy type of stuff to him. He's going to get a lot stronger, man. A lot stronger. Looking forward to seeing him.
Right. Eric O'Brien says, before Cam Williams, why has Notre Dame really struggled with top tier wide receiver recruiting?
We've had this question asked before, and I don't necessarily accept the premise. Notre Dame has landed a bunch of highly ranked kids. The current class, Braylon James was ranked in the top 100 by at least one service. Jaden Greathouse was ranked in the top 100 by at least one service. I think it's been a development problem, not a recruiting problem.
Yeah. Well, it's always funny because I have a buddy that literally said something similar to this of like, Notre Dame needs to go to the portal for wide receiver. I'm like, why? They have 4 stars everywhere, man. Like there's literally not a 4-star on the depth chart at wide receiver. I don't accept it either, honestly, Eric. I mean, even guys that didn't necessarily pan out, like, I mean, Jordan Johnson didn't pan out, right? But like he was a heavily pursued high caliber recruits, right? you could argue that Kevin Austin didn't nearly hit his upside at the University of Notre Dame, but he still was a high level recruits. I mean, it's always just been about can you get the most out of those guys, and I don't think that they've been able to as of lately, right? So I think Notre Dame needs to develop the wide receiver position better. If you can't get more out of Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey if he comes back, Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, Braylon James, Caleb Smith, Cam Williams coming in with Logan Saldate and Micah Gilbert, then there's a coaching issue there, right? There's a development issue there. I just listed every single player that is considered a 4-star caliber recruit outside of Caleb Smith. I think Caleb Smith was a consensus 3-star. Otherwise, Logan Saldate is considered a 4-star. Caleb Williams is considered a 5-star on the consensus on the industry ranking. Micah Gilbert is a consensus 4-star. Like you're talking about a lot of 4-star players there, right? So I think that it is definitely all about not all about. I think it is mostly about development, and you need to develop that room a whole lot better, in my estimation. No doubt about it. All right, let's go to our next one. All right, that one is for Brian, I believe. That is. All right. All right. This question is from Siggy13. 5 years from now, with the coaching staff changes and controversies experienced this year, who do you think is in the best spot? Michigan, Michigan State, or Ohio State? I mean, I think it's Ohio State is in the best position for me, Siggy. I mean, look, Ohio State needs to figure something out as far as against Michigan right now, and they need to develop certain areas of their team better, but they are always going to have talents, right? From a recruiting perspective, they are still the power in the Midwest. There is no doubt about that. So whether it is Ryan Day or it's somebody else coming along the line, Ohio State's going to have a lot of talent, and they are going to be in a position where you are going to be able to compete for conference and national championships if you do the work that you need to do on a day-to-day basis from a preparation perspective. I don't envision Ohio State falling off anytime soon. I think that they are just it's going to be a question of is Ryan Day the guy long-term to lead you into the promised land, or is it somebody else eventually? But ultimately, there's still a lot of talent on that team, man. Look, you need to figure out some things in those big games. But the thing about Michigan is that I'm still not sold that in 5 years, Jim Harbaugh is the coach at Michigan. And I think we forget that before Jim Harbaugh, Michigan was not in a great spot, right? It wasn't in a great spot. And I still think that eventually the lack of recruiting on Michigan's side, I know it's been better in 2024 than it was previously, but eventually that recruiting is going to hurt you a little bit, right? Being able to develop and be able to acquire talent at a high level. And ultimately, Jim Harbaugh is long term at Michigan. I'm not sold that he will be there in 3 years, but better suited for 5 years. So I would still say Michigan is number 2 just because they're so far ahead of where Michigan State is right now. Like I think Michigan State in a couple years, if they do the right things under Jonathan Smith, I think they have a pretty decently quick turnaround. As far as in 3 to 4 years, I can see them being competitive in the Big Ten. But Michigan is starting at such a higher level, right? Even if Jim Harbaugh, let's say hypothetically, leaves after this year, you're still going to be in a situation where the next coach coming in is still going to have a lot of the things that have made you successful, and you still are going to have the blueprint against Ohio State on the short term. So I think long term, I would still take Ohio State just because I think it's a little bit more sustainable, depending on if there's a coaching change at some point, than it is at Michigan. I don't think that Michigan is incredibly sustainable because, again, I mean, in between Lloyd Carr and Jim Harbaugh, there was a lot of at Michigan, right? Like it wasn't all good. There was a lot of bad. For the most part, Ohio State's been a very consistent football team for the duration of my lifetime. So Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, but I will say Michigan State is definitely on the up. It's just about, how long is it going to take potentially? So. All right. Next question here we had from Beef Eater. What's up, Beef Eater? Says no for sale sign on Mike Elko's yard yet as of morning school drop off. Does this put Riley Leonard in play for Notre Dame? I mean, I have no idea, Beef Eater. I mean, I like we'll have, and I know that you're on the message board, obviously at boards.irishbreakdown.com, but guys, we'll have a lot of intel as far as transfer portal targets moving forward for Notre Dame. it really depends on, what fit makes sense and ultimately what type of quarterback Notre Dame is pushing for, right? So, I mean, if Riley Leonard hits the portal, if I was Notre Dame, would I give it a look? Yes. Am I necessarily saying though, if I was Notre Dame, I would 100? Like, am I saying that I for sure think Notre Dame will? I'm not saying that. But would I personally do my homework there? Yes. I think he's way too talented not to do your homework if you are Notre Dame, especially with what the position you're in. So, is he in play? I have no idea. Could he be? Possible. If I was the head coach at Notre Dame, would I at least give Riley Leonard a look? Yes. Does that mean necessarily I would pull the trigger and say, that's my guy 100%? I'm not saying that necessarily, but I would definitely give it a look. I think that you need to do your due diligence as a CEO of a program, as a head coach. You need to be able to do your homework there. So I think Notre Dame has we'll see if Notre Dame takes a shot there or not. But I mean, I'd be surprised if Riley Leonard wasn't heavily pursued by a lot of different schools if he entered the portal. We'll see if he ultimately does, though, because as of today, Riley Leonard is not in the portal. And also, we do need to remember this isn't the first coaching change that Riley Leonard has dealt with. I mean, he had David Cutcliffe as a true freshman, and then obviously Mike Elko came in. Maybe the next head coach comes in and just reaffirms everything for Riley Leonard. I mean, we have no idea of telling if that's going to happen or not. So we shall see. But he's definitely a player I would at least do my homework on if I was Notre Dame, for sure. All right. So we had. All right, we're going to get that one. We got that one already. All right, we answered that one as well, folks. I'm just working through a couple of these questions. All right. All right, we had a question from number one ND fan. It says, why didn't the offense play with more tempo outside of end of half drives? Seemed they were more efficient. I mean, we've talked about this a ton. I think there was a philosophy thing when you're talking about Notre Dame. And I think that there were times this year where the philosophy for Notre Dame was to play smart, fundamental, and at a just overall a little bit of a slower pace, because that is how they assume that the offensive roster was constructed. Right, you're a strong offensive line, you have a deep running back room. Let's work into those strengths. And I think that ultimately you can't win that way consistently, right? Like in today's game anyway. About 10, 15 years ago, you can win that way all day. And there might even be a year here and there where you could still do it. But I think for that sustainability that I always talk about, it's going to be about Notre Dame figuring it out next step to be a more balanced and well operative offense. And that's not only from a running game, passing game perspective, that's also from a changing of pace perspective. I think that is like number one Notre Dame fan. Like Notre Dame was in a good spot offensively against Stanford in a lot of instances. And it was just like, all right, let's get up to the line. Like, let's move a little bit. I'm not asking for no huddle. I'm not asking for, hyperactive, get up to the line, snap it as quick as possible. Like, I'm not asking for that. I'm asking when something's going good, keep that momentum and get guys super excited to be a part of this, right? I don't think that Notre Dame did enough of that this year. And I've talked about that a ton, right? So the tempo, the pace is the better way to phrase it for me. I think it does need to improve in certain aspects of it. But I think that hopefully there's an identity shift that happens at some point, right? Like I have no problem with slowing down the pace of an offense at times. I have no problem with working the pace of the offense up at times as well. I'm a big believer in and this is any offense. When you have momentum, you hold on to it. And that is when excitement is built, especially off of an offense. And I think that Notre Dame needs to do a better job of utilizing that to the best of their ability.
A lot going on, man. Chris Tyree
Yep.
just announced he's going into the portal as well. So working on
Man.
that. Not overly surprised by that. Was hoping that he would change his mind, but I just think he looked at how he was used this year and realized there's places he could go that are actually going to use him more. And so not surprised by that. Jacob Saylor with the super chat on that. Appreciate that very much, man. Ryan, we just get last two and then we get out of here real quick. This one's for you from DJ McCowan. It says, Gents finally escaped the 5-sided prison. I didn't know what that meant. He said he worked at the Pentagon. So now he says that it makes sense. And got reassigned to New Jersey. Any good high school teams to go watch here? That's for you.
Oh,
Ryan.
man. I mean, it depends what part of Jersey you're at. I mean, North Jersey has a ton of them. I mean, you can go to Bergen Catholic, Paramus Catholic. I mean, there is St. Peter's is usually a good program. I haven't followed them as much the last couple years. I mean, there's a lot of good football teams in New Jersey, honestly. Like New Jersey is quietly does not get enough credit as far as how good of high school football that they play typically. So yeah, Bergen Catholic, Paramus Catholic, like those types of schools. The Catholic schools up north are a lot of good football in Jersey.
Are there any good Southern Jersey schools? Because like I'm trying to remember, I
St.
signed a
Joe's
running back.
Hamilton is
Yeah,
I would consider a
I'm
southern
trying to
school.
remember. I signed a kid named Jerome. Oh, it was Jerome Beverly. Was a running back, and I can't remember. He was from a Central Jersey kid, and I honestly, for the life of me, cannot remember what high school he went to. But yeah, I
Yep.
did a little recruiting in Jersey, right, back in the day. But I
We
was more central. Like the coaches that got paid a lot more than I did are the ones that recruited the
yeah,
big time schools in Northern Jersey. They sent me like Central and Southern Jersey, to recruit guys. Although I've been told from Jersey people there is no such thing as Central Jersey. I'm
there
simply
is no
looking at
central
it from
Jersey. Yeah,
a geographic standpoint of where the
yeah,
high schools were. So yeah,
sure.
yep. And then last one here is from Gavin Harden. I'll read this one, Ryan. If you guys wouldn't mind to please pray for my family, specifically my younger brother, who got diagnosed with stage 3 brain cancer earlier this week. Our outlook is not favorable. Gavin, I'm incredibly sad to hear that, man. And if you could let us know what his name is, we would gladly pray for him and for your whole family, because I know this. I can't imagine what you guys are going through. I truly cannot. And but we will certainly. I do believe in the power of prayer, as I said a bunch of different times, and we will certainly be praying for your brother, and would love to know his name, and so we can keep him in our prayers. But do us a favor too, right? Like, I believe prayer is a constant thing. I don't think it's something you just do once and then, I think it's something that you can and should constantly lift them up. So please keep us posted on that. Please don't forget to ask us for that. Put it on the message board, and as you know, at IB, we care about that stuff just more than we care about we think about, a guy jumping in the transfer portal. So certainly care about that, and we're glad that you felt the need to come talk to us about it and reach out, because as you can see in the chat, there's a lot of different people that are more than willing to lift up your brother and your family in prayer. So we'll certainly do that. And just wanted to kind of end it on that note, Ryan, so you can take us out of here.
Yep. We appreciate everyone for joining us today on the Notre Dame football mailbag. Before you leave, if you could please hit that like button for us, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell. Make sure you go to boards@irishbreakdown.com to sign up there. You can find all our free content at irishbreakdown.com. But again, make sure you hit the notification bell. You know when a show is coming for you this week. If you're listening to us on any of your favorite podcast platforms, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. It's Brian Driscoll. I'm Ryan Roberts. Again, we thank you so much for joining us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast.